The winter wind carried the faint scent of wood smoke and falling snow, brushing against tired faces for what might be the very last time. It is the middle of January, in a year that has grown heavy with history, but right now, in this quiet moment, there is only the cold air and the pale, gray sky over Berlin. The city above is a fractured landscape of stone and memory, blanketed in a soft, forgiving layer of white snow. The flakes drift down slowly, silently, landing on the collars of heavy wool coats and melting into the fabric. For the men and women standing in the garden of the Reich Chancellery, this brief pause in the freezing winter air is a fleeting luxury. They do not yet know the true weight of the threshold they are about to cross, but there is a shared, unspoken feeling that the world they have always known is quietly slipping away. Imagine standing there, feeling the sharp, crisp bite of the January air filling your lungs. It is an honest cold. It wakes the senses. You can see your own breath rising in small, cloudy plumes, a quiet testament to life against the stillness of the winter garden. Above, the sky is a vast, open canopy of overcast gray, bruised by the twilight, yet still offering the comforting expanse of the natural world. The trees, though bare and shivering in the wind, reach upward, their dark branches tracing delicate lines against the clouds. For the secretaries, the orderlies, the aides, and the quiet workers who keep the invisible gears of this place turning, this sky is a companion. It tells them when morning is broken, when evening is settling in, and when it is time to rest. But the order has been given to move down, to leave the sky behind. Slowly, the procession begins toward the entrance of the bunker. There is no rush, no sudden panic in this moment. It is a quiet resignation, an organized retreat into the earth. As they step toward the heavy concrete doorway, they instinctively look up one last time. A young secretary pauses, her hand resting on the rough fabric of her coat. She tilts her head back, letting a single, cold snowflake land on her cheek. She closes her eyes, feeling the brief, sharp sting of the cold before it melts into a drop of water. It is a small thing, a tiny interaction with the earth and the weather, but in the days to come, she will think back on that single snowflake with a profound, aching nostalgia. She commits the feeling of the wind to memory, folding it away in her mind like a precious letter from home. The descent begins. Step by deliberate step. The stairs are made of poured concrete, thick and immovable. With each step down, the sound of the world above begins to fade. The howling of the winter wind is replaced by the hollow, rhythmic echo of leather soles on stone. Down, down they go. The air changes almost immediately. The sharp, fresh chill of the winter afternoon is swallowed by a dry, still coolness. There is no breeze here. The air feels heavy, settled, untouched by the seasons. It carries the faint, dusty scent of wet cement and old paper, a smell that will soon become the only fragrance they know. To walk down these stairs is to step out of time. With every downward movement, the natural light from the doorway above grows dimmer, casting long, fading shadows against the gray walls. The psychological shift is profound, yet it happens so quietly. You are leaving behind the unpredictability of the open air, the vastness of the horizon, and trading it for a fortress of shadows. It is a voluntary burial, a descent into a windowless world where the sun will never rise and the rain will never fall. At the bottom of the stairs, the heavy steel bulkheads wait. They are massive, imposing structures, painted a dull, utilitarian gray. They were built to keep the destruction of the world out, but as the staff steps through them, there is the undeniable sensation that they are also locking themselves in. The heavy doors swing shut behind them on thick, greased hinges. They do not slam. They close with a slow, heavy thud that vibrates through the floorboards, a deep, resonant sound that seals the silence in. And then, there's the light. As the natural twilight of the world above is locked away, the long, narrow corridors of the bunker are bathed in an artificial, pale yellow glow. The electric bulbs hum softly in their cages, casting an unending, unchanging daylight over the concrete. It is a light that casts no natural shadows, a light that tells no time. It washes the color from the cheeks of the young men and women walking the halls, painting everyone in the same tired, sepia tone. Under this light, the world becomes very small. For the people who must now call this subterranean labyrinth their home, the first hours are spent trying to anchor themselves in the unnatural space. They carry small suitcases, briefcases, and simple cardboard boxes filled with the fragments of their interrupted lives. We see an orderly quietly unpacking his belongings in a narrow, cramped dormitory. The room is little more than a concrete box, furnished with a simple metal cot and a small wooden chair. He moves with a slow, deliberate care, placing a folded woolen blanket at the foot of the bed. From the bottom of his bag, he pulls out a small, framed photograph of his wife and child, standing in a sunlit garden that feels like it exists on another planet. He places the picture on a small ledge beside his bed. He adjusts it once, then twice, making sure it is perfectly straight. In this world of gray walls and low ceilings, that small square of captured sunlight is a lifeline. It is a quiet act of everyday heroism, the human spirit insisting on warmth and connection in a place built of cold stone. Down the hall, in a modest workspace that will serve as an office, a young woman runs her hands over the keys of her typewriter. The metal keys are cool to the touch. She organizes her desk with meticulous precision, stacking fresh sheets of paper, aligning her pencils, arranging her carbon copies. It is a way to maintain control, to build a familiar routine against the surreal backdrop of the bunker. She sits in her chair, listening to the muffled sounds of the underground. Footsteps passing in the corridor. The quiet murmur of voices behind closed doors. The clinking of a teacup against a saucer. It is surprisingly quiet down here. Above them, the city is holding its breath, waiting for the final storms of the war. But beneath meters of reinforced concrete and packed earth, those storms feel distant, almost imaginary. The bunker wraps its inhabitants in a strange, heavy blanket of isolation. It is a cocoon of false safety. There are no windows to look out of, no way to see the ruins or the fires. There is only the long hallway, the closed doors, and the endless, artificial afternoon. As the first evening in the bunker approaches, though no one can see the sunset, a subtle change comes over the inhabitants. The realization of their confinement begins to settle in their chests, soft and heavy like a stone. They speak to one another in hushed, gentle tones, their voices naturally lowering in the confined acoustic space. Loud noises feel intrusive here. They walk softly, they close doors carefully. It is as if they are afraid of waking the heavy silence that presses against the walls. In the washroom, a woman turns on the tap. The water runs cold and clear, splashing into the porcelain basin. She splashes the water onto her face, closing her eyes, letting the coolness soothe her tired skin. When she opens her eyes and looks in the small mirror, she sees the dark circles beginning to form beneath her eyes. She takes a deep breath, the sound of it loud in the small room. She dries her face with a coarse cotton towel, folding it neatly over the rail. She tells herself that it will not be long. That soon, they will walk back up those concrete stairs and feel the wind again. It is a quiet, private hope, whispered only to herself in the stillness of the underground. Out in the main corridor, the night shift begins to blur seamlessly with the day. Without the cues of the natural world, time begins to stretch and warp. A clock ticking on the wall becomes the only measure of existence. The hands move steadily, methodically, completely indifferent to the strange new lives unfolding beneath the earth. The people here learn to navigate by the rhythm of the bunker itself, the arrival of meal trays, the changing of the guards, the quiet times when the typewriters finally stop their rhythmic clattering. They are a community of shadows now, bound together by the thick concrete walls that surround them. They share quiet smiles in the hallway, offering small, polite nods of encouragement to one another. An older aide offers his chair to a young secretary whose feet ache from walking the hard floors. A cook saves an extra ration of sugar for the tea of someone who looks particularly homesick. These are the small, tender threads of humanity that weave through the dark, keeping the spirit from fraying completely. They are frightened, yes, but they are also profoundly resilient. They find comfort in the routine, in the work, in the simple presence of one another. As the first imaginary night falls over the bunker, the lights are dimmed just a fraction in the sleeping quarters. People lie in their narrow cots, staring up at the low, gray ceilings. They pull the rough blankets up to their chins, trying to find warmth in the cool, subterranean air. They close their eyes and try to remember the feeling of the sun. They try to remember the sound of birds in the Chancellery Garden, the rustle of leaves in the summer wind, the deep, brilliant blue of the sky. They hold these memories close to their hearts, guarding them like precious embers in the dark. As sleep slowly drifts over them, blurring the edges of their fears and softening the hard lines of the concrete walls, they surrender to the strange, quiet rhythm of their new world. The natural world above them continues to turn, indifferent to their absence. The snow continues to fall on the empty, silent streets. The winter night deepens. But here, deep beneath the earth, wrapped in layers of stone and steel, they rest in the heavy, unbroken stillness, dreaming of the day they will walk back up into the light and feel the gentle touch of the sun once more. Close your eyes and listen to the invisible current of the air. Deep beneath the earth, beneath the ruined gardens and the heavy stones of a fractured city, there is a sound. It is not a loud sound, nor is it sudden. It is a steady, low, and unending thrum. It is the great iron lungs of the ventilation system, breathing for those who can no longer reach the sky. Over the days and nights that blend seamlessly together, this deep, mechanical hum becomes the very heartbeat of the subterranean world. It is a strange, modern lullaby, a constant companion in the dim hallways, washing over the tired minds of the men and women who have traded the sun for electric bulbs. When you first descend into the underground, the hum of the fans feels unnatural, a reminder of the thousands of pounds of concrete pressing down from above. But slowly, gently, the human mind does what it must to survive. The mind takes that mechanical drone and turns it into something else. It becomes the sound of safety. It becomes the rush of an ocean wave that never quite crashes, or the distant wind moving through a forest of pine trees you can no longer see. In the windowless world, there is no morning dew. There is no twilight. There is only the pale, unwavering yellow glow of the caged bulbs lining the ceiling. Because the light never changes, the people here must invent the day themselves. They must create a rhythm out of nothing, pulling a delicate thread of normalcy through the heavy, stagnant air. Imagine waking up in a narrow, gray room. The walls are cool to the touch. You lie still for a moment, wrapped in a heavy woolen blanket, staring up at the low ceiling. Your body tells you it is morning, but your eyes see the same artificial twilight you closed them to hours ago. The ventilator hums its low, steady note. You listen to it for a moment, letting the sound anchor you. It tells you that the air is flowing, that you are safe in this quiet tomb. Slowly, the bunker begins to stir. The waking is not marked by the singing of birds or the brightening of a window pane, but by the soft, shuffled footsteps out in the long corridor. It is marked by the quiet, polite murmurs of colleagues greeting one another in hushed tones. The voices are always kept low here. The acoustic of the concrete turns every sharp sound into a harsh echo, so the inhabitants have learned to speak almost entirely in whispers. It creates an atmosphere of profound intimacy, as if everyone is sharing a single, delicate secret. A young secretary sits on the edge of her simple metal cot. She smooths the wrinkles from her skirt with careful, deliberate hands. In a world where everything has been turned upside down, the simple act of dressing well, of parting her hair neatly in the small mirror, becomes an act of quiet rebellion. It is a way of holding onto herself. She pours a small amount of water from an enamel pitcher into a porcelain basin. The water is startlingly cold. She splashes it onto her face, the sudden chill sending a rush of life through her tired skin. She closes her eyes, breathing in the scent of simple soap, allowing herself just one brief moment of longing for a hot bath in a sunlit room. before turning the handle of her door and stepping out into the artificial day. Out in the corridor, the air smells of wet cement, wool, and the faint, sweet aroma of roasted chicory root substitute. It is time for breakfast. In the small, cramped pantry that serves as a kitchen, a few workers move with a practiced, gentle choreography. They navigate the tight space without bumping into one another, a silent dance of shared existence. A thick loaf of dark bread is sliced. The knife makes a soft, rhythmic scraping sound against the wooden board. Someone sets out a row of delicate teacups, the porcelain clinking softly, a fragile sound of the world above, somehow surviving down here in the deep. They gather around small tables or stand leaning against the cool walls, cradling the warm cups in their hands. The warmth of the ceramic seeps into their palms, a small, profound comfort. They do not talk of the war. They do not talk of the heavy vibrations that occasionally tremble through the floorboards. Instead, they speak of small things. A young guard softly recounts a memory of his mother's garden in the springtime, the way the apple blossoms looked when they fell like snow. A nurse smiles, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and shares a recipe for a plum cake she promises to bake when they all go home. These small, shared stories are lifelines. They are delicate bridges built over an abyss of fear. By sharing a memory of a blue sky, they bring the sky down into the bunker, if only for a fleeting moment. As the imaginary morning shifts into an imaginary afternoon, the work begins. It is a surreal pantomime of office life, conducted inside a fortress. The typewriters begin their chorus. Clack, 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 ding. The rhythmic tapping blends with the low drone of the ventilator. Young women sit at small desks, their posture straight, taking dictation, filing carbon copies, typing out memos that will never truly matter. But the work itself is a savior. It demands focus. It requires the hands to move and the mind to order itself. Sometimes, a wave of sudden, breathless panic will wash over one of them. The walls will suddenly feel too close, the ceiling too low. The air, despite the great fans, will feel too thick to breathe. In these moments, the heroism of the bunker reveals itself. It is not a loud, marching heroism. It is the heroism of a coworker noticing the trembling hands of her friend. It is the gentle hand placed warmly on a shoulder. It is the soft whisper leaning in close, saying, "I know. Just close your eyes. Just breathe with the hum. You are all right." And the panic recedes, soothed away by a simple human touch in the cold gray void. In the quietest pockets of the afternoon, when the typing slows, the inhabitants find corners to hide away in. Cut off from the wind and the rain, they turn inward. A young orderly sits on a wooden crate in the hallway, a small notepad resting on his knee. He is writing a letter to a wife he has not seen in many seasons. He unscrews the cap of his fountain pen, watching the dark ink pool at the tip. He pauses, staring at the blank paper. What can he tell her? He cannot describe the claustrophobia, or the scent of the dust. He does not want to frighten her. So, he writes of love. He writes of the future. He writes about the books he is reading, and how the tea here is never quite as good as the tea she makes. He pours all his longing, all his gentle hope, into the sweeping curves of his handwriting. In the act of writing, the concrete walls melt away. For the 10 minutes it takes to fill the page, he is no longer buried in the earth. He is sitting beside her in their living room, watching the sunlight play across the floorboards. As the hours stretch on, the bunker shifts from its daytime routine to its evening shadow. The pale lights do not dim, but the energy of the people softens. The body knows it has been awake too long. Eyelids grow heavy. The typewriters finally fall silent, covered with their dark protective cloths like birds put to sleep in their cages. The evening tea is poured. The conversations grow even softer, reduced to the barest of whispers. People begin to drift back toward their small, cramped quarters. The hallway empties, leaving only the guards standing at their posts, staring at the blank walls, lost in their own quiet thoughts. The young secretary returns to her room. She takes off her cardigan, folding it meticulously over the back of her chair. She unpins her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders, a private unraveling at the end of a long, invisible day. She turns the small switch on the wall, and her room falls into darkness, save for the thin line of pale yellow light spilling in from beneath the door. She pulls the heavy blanket up to her chin. The air is cool. She closes her eyes. Now, in the dark, there is no more pretending. There is no more work to distract the mind. There is only the silence and the great, mechanical breathing of the bunker. The ventilator thrums. Whoosh. Hum. Whoosh. Hum. She focuses on the sound. She lets it fill the empty space in her mind. She imagines that the sound is a train, carrying her away through a snowy countryside, carrying her home. She imagines it is the wind blowing across a vast, open ocean. The hum wraps around her, a heavy, strangely protective blanket of sound. It drowns out the quiet fears that try to creep in from the corners of the room. It drowns out the muffled thuds from the world above. The lullaby of the ventilator plays on, steady, rhythmic, eternal. It strokes the frayed edges of exhausted nerves. It rocks the mind into a state of numbed peace. One by one, the people in the bunker surrender to it. They drift into sleep under the earth, lulled by the spinning of iron blades, dreaming of green grass, of fresh rain, of the simple, beautiful light of the sun. The great machine breathes for them, watching over their rest, keeping the air moving in the long, dark night of the underground. In the deepest, quietest hours of the artificial night, when the heavy concrete seems to hold its breath, the loudest sound is the gentle, rhythmic scratching of a steel nib against a sheet of paper. Down here, far beneath the earth, the world has been reduced to a narrow corridor of pale light and gray shadows. The sky is a memory, and the changing of the seasons is something that happens only in the mind. Yet, in the quiet corners of this subterranean fortress, life insists on reaching out. It reaches out not with loud voices or grand gestures, but with the delicate, deliberate loops of dark ink resting on a fragile page. Imagine a small, modest desk pushed against a cold wall. Resting on it is a single lamp, casting a warm, golden circle of light. Outside this pool of light, the bunker stretches on, vast and imposing, filled with the murmur of unseen men and the unending hum of the ventilators. But inside this golden circle, the world is entirely different. It is intimate. It is safe. It is a private sanctuary built of paper, where a young woman sits with her shoulders softly curved over her work, holding a fountain pen as if it were a key to another universe. For the young secretaries who spend their days typing official decrees and moving through the dim hallways like silent ghosts, the brief hours of rest are a precious, guarded treasure. Cut off from the wind, the rain, and the sun, they seek out the only true window they have left. They find it in the quiet, comforting act of writing letters home. To hold a pen in this place is to reclaim a small piece of oneself. The physical ritual of it is deeply grounding. Watch as she slowly unscrews the cap of her fountain pen. The smooth, cool resin of the barrel rests familiarly against her fingers. She reaches for a small glass bottle of ink, the dark liquid catching the lamplight, shimmering like a tiny, captured midnight pool. She dips the pen, watching the metal nib drink in the color. There is a profound, almost hypnotic peace in these small, methodical movements. In a world that has spiraled entirely out of her control, this small wooden desk, this blank sheet of paper, this bottle of ink, these are things she can command. She smooths the paper with the side of her hand. The texture is slightly coarse, a pale, cream-colored surface waiting to hold her thoughts. She pauses, the tip of the pen hovering just a breath above the page. What does one write when they are buried alive in history? What words can possibly bridge the unimaginable distance between a concrete bunker and a quiet kitchen in a faraway hometown? She begins with a familiar, tender greeting. My dearest mother. As the ink flows onto the paper, something magical happens in the silence of the room. The crushing weight of the ceiling seems to lift, just a fraction. The smell of the damp walls and the stale, filtered air fades away. In her mind, she is no longer sitting under the ruined gardens of Berlin. She is walking up the stone path to her childhood home. She can see the curtains fluttering in the open window. She can smell the sweet, earthy scent of rain on the pavement and the warm, golden aroma of baking bread escaping from the kitchen. The letter becomes a vessel of protective love. She does not write about the tremors that shake the dust from the ceiling. She does not mention the hollow, exhausted eyes of the men who walk the corridors, or the terrifying, suffocating claustrophobia that sometimes grips her throat in the middle of the night. To write of those things would be to send a dark, heavy shadow up into the light. And she wants, more than anything, to protect the people she loves from the dark. Instead, she weaves a beautiful, gentle fiction. She writes of mundane, comforting things. She asks about her younger sister's piano lessons. She wonders if the old apple tree in the backyard has begun to blossom yet, though she cannot feel the spring herself. She writes that she is eating well, that she is resting, that the work is quiet and the people are kind. She pours all her quiet resilience into maintaining a sense of profound, unshakable normalcy. Every carefully chosen word is an act of everyday heroism. It is the bravery of a soft heart refusing to surrender its warmth to the cold stone. She writes to reassure, to comfort, and in doing so, she comforts herself. The steady, rhythmic shhhshhhshhh of the pen moving across the paper becomes her own personal lullaby. It is the sound of her own spirit, continuing to breathe, continuing to hope. Across the room, another young woman sits on the edge of her narrow cot, a writing pad resting on her knees. She does not have a lamp of her own, so she leans toward the doorway, catching the pale, spillover light from the corridor. She is writing to her husband, a man stationed somewhere out in the vast, fractured landscape of the continent. She does not know where he is. She does not know if he will ever read these words. But the writing is a necessity. It is a way of holding his hand across the impossible distance. She writes his name, and her vision blurs for a moment with quiet, unspoken tears. She blinks them away, taking a slow, trembling breath. She lets the breath out slowly, letting it carry the fear away with it. She focuses on the feeling of the paper under her palm. She writes to him about a memory they share, a summer afternoon spent walking near a lake, the way the sunlight caught the ripples on the water, the sound of his laughter. She paints the picture with her words, filling the dark, empty spaces of the bunker with the bright, vibrant colors of their past. In these shared silences, a profound sisterhood exists among the women. They do not need to speak to understand the heavy emotional toll of the ink. Sometimes, a desk blotter is quietly passed from one table to another. A spare envelope is offered with a soft, knowing smile. If a tear happens to fall, smudging a line of carefully written text, another woman might step close, gently resting a warm hand on a trembling shoulder. No words are exchanged. Just a shared breath. A quiet acknowledgement of the immense, invisible burdens they all carry. It is a tender, deeply human communion, forged in the shadows. There is a strange, poignant beauty in the things they choose to describe. Because they are starved of the natural world, their letters become filled with hyper-focused details of the life they remember. They write about the exact shade of blue in a twilight sky. They write about the feeling of a woolen scarf wrapped against a winter chill, or the taste of fresh milk. The bunker strips away everything that is not essential, leaving them with a pure, concentrated appreciation for the smallest, simplest joys of living. Through their letters, they are gathering these memories, holding them close like a bouquet of delicate, pressed flowers. As the imaginary night wears on, the pages begin to fill. The handwriting, which may have started out tight and controlled, often softens as the letter progresses. The cursive loops become looser, more relaxed, as the writer sinks deeper into the comforting embrace of her own memories. The letters become a flowing river of ink, carrying the soul away from the concrete and the steel, carrying it up to the surface, and out into the vast, open world. Finally, the letter comes to an end. The closing words are always the most difficult to write, for they require the writer to say goodbye, and to gently return to the reality of the underground. I am always with you, she writes. Do not worry for me. She signs her name, lifting the pen with a slow, deliberate grace. She sets the pen down. The soft click of the metal touching the wooden desk is the only sound. She takes the letter in both hands, holding it up to the light for a moment to let the ink dry. It is a fragile thing, just a thin sheet of paper covered in dark blue stains. Yet, in her hands, it holds the weight of the entire world. It holds her love, her courage, her quietest fears, and her deepest hopes. She folds the paper. First in half, bringing the top edge to meet the bottom with a soft crease. Then again into thirds. The paper makes a quiet, crisp sound as it is pressed flat. She takes an envelope, its edges slightly yellowed from the damp air of the bunker. She slips the folded pages inside. There is a profound sense of finality in this action. The words are no longer just hers, they belong to the journey now. She moistens the flap of the envelope, the faint, bitter taste of the adhesive lingering on her tongue. She presses it closed, running her thumb along the edge to seal it tight. She writes the address on the front, her handwriting careful, clear, and perfectly steady. She places a small, square stamp in the corner. The sealed envelope rests on the desk. To the eye, it is just a piece of mail. But to the heart, it is a bird waiting to be set free. It is a piece of her spirit, packaged and prepared to defy the heavy walls that hold her captive. Tomorrow, it will be placed in a leather pouch. It will be carried up the long, echoing stairs, through the heavy steel doors, and out into whatever remains of the city above. It will travel through danger and uncertainty, a tiny, silent messenger of love braving the storm. But for tonight, the journey is over. The connection has been made. The act of writing has soothed the frayed edges of her mind. She looks at the envelope one last time, gently touching the corner with her fingertip, a silent blessing for its safe passage. She screws the cap back onto her fountain pen. She carefully closes the small glass bottle of ink. The ritual is complete. The desk is ordered and calm. She reaches out and clicks off the small golden lamp. The warm circle of light vanishes, and the dim, pale gray of the bunker reclaims the space. But the darkness does not feel quite as heavy as it did before. The air feels a little easier to breathe. She stands up, her chair making a soft, scraping sound against the floor. She walks slowly back toward her narrow cot. The hum of the ventilator wraps around her, but her mind is no longer trapped in its mechanical rhythm. She lies down, pulling the blanket over her shoulders, closing her eyes to the artificial twilight. In her heart, she is walking through a sunlit garden, listening to the wind in the apple trees, waiting for her letter to arrive home. And in that quiet, beautiful dream, wrapped in the echoes of her own ink, she finally finds peace. Through the heavy wooden door, the scent of sweet, stale tobacco drifts into the corridor like a ghost searching for a way out. It is quiet out here in the hallway, where the pale yellow light of the bulbs casts long, motionless shadows against the concrete walls. But behind this door, a strange and quiet theater is playing out, day after fading day. Here, in the dim, windowless pantry just a few steps away, a young man is carefully arranging a silver tray. He moves with a slow, practiced grace, mindful of the deep, heavy silence of the underground. He places 4 delicate porcelain cups onto their matching saucers. He sets down a small silver pitcher of hot water, a bowl of sugar, and a pot of dark, steaming tea. The silver tray is cool and heavy in his hands. He takes a slow, grounding breath, feeling the smooth metal against his palms, before he turns and walks toward the conference room. He does not wear a uniform of power, he wears the simple, neat clothes of a server. His role in this subterranean world is to bring warmth, to clear the ash, and to move unseen through the edges of a collapsing empire. He turns the brass handle. The door swings open with a soft, heavy sigh, revealing a room thick with a hazy, blue cloud of cigar smoke. The air inside is incredibly still, heavy with exhaustion and unspoken fears. In the center of the room sits a large, heavy table, bathed in the harsh, downward glare of an electric lamp. Beneath the cone of light, spread out like a great, fragile tapestry, are the maps. They are beautiful, tragic things. Huge sheets of thick, stiff paper, covered in sweeping contour lines, pale blue rivers, and the green shapes of distant forests. But to the men standing around the table, these are not pictures of the earth. They are the last remaining fragments of a world they used to hold. The young server steps into the room, his footsteps completely swallowed by the thick carpet. He moves like a shadow, slipping along the edge of the wall, carrying his tray of porcelain and steam. No one looks up as he enters. The men around the table are entirely captivated by the paper world beneath their hands. He watches them from the corner of his eye. They are older men, wrapped in gray uniforms that suddenly seem slightly too large for their frames. Their shoulders are stooped under an invisible, crushing weight. In the harsh light of the desk lamp, their faces look like landscapes themselves, deeply lined, pale, and exhausted beyond all measure of sleep. They lean over the table, propping themselves up on trembling arms, staring down at the colored pins pushed into the paper. The server steps closer, gently placing the silver tray onto a side table. The soft clink of a cup settling against a saucer is the only sound he makes. He pours the tea, watching the dark amber liquid rise in the white porcelain. A ribbon of steam curls upward, tangling with the thick, drifting cigar smoke. As he pours, he looks at the table. The maps are covered in tiny, colored pins. Red pins, yellow pins, blue pins, all with smooth, glass heads that catch the electric light and sparkle like tiny jewels. To the young man holding the teapot, they look like scattered toys, or beads from a broken necklace resting on a drawing. An old man, his eyes dark and hollowed by weeks without sunlight, reaches out with a shaking hand. He pinches a small red pin between his thumb and forefinger. He pulls it from the paper with a tiny, muted pop, and moves it an inch to the left, pressing it back into the map. It is a deeply surreal thing to witness. The young server stands perfectly still, holding his breath, watching this silent movement. He knows, and everyone in the bunker knows, that the world above is shattered. He knows that the earth occasionally trembles, dropping fine gray dust from the ceiling, because the reality of the war is knocking on the roof of their concrete tomb. Yet, here in this room, a man moves a small piece of red glass across a piece of paper, and for a fleeting, desperate moment, he believes he has moved an army. They speak in hushed, gravelly whispers. The server does not listen to the words, only to the cadence of their voices. It sounds like the rustling of dry winter leaves. They murmur about divisions, about flanking maneuvers, about reinforcements coming from the north. But the words lack life. They are just echoes, bouncing softly off the damp walls. They are telling each other a story, a dark and tragic fairy tale, to keep the terrifying truth at bay. The server picks up a warm teacup and approaches the table. He waits for a pause in the murmuring, finding a small, empty space on the edge of the map to set the saucer down. He moves with extreme gentleness, as if the slightest sudden movement might shatter the fragile illusion hovering over the table. As he sets the cup down, the man closest to him slowly turns his head. For just a fraction of a second, the general looks away from the map and meets the eyes of the young server. In that brief, quiet exchange of glances, all titles and uniforms fall away. There is no commander and no servant. There are only two human beings, buried deep in the earth, breathing the same stale air. The older man's eyes are swimming in a profound, unnamable sorrow. They are the eyes of someone waking from a long, confusing dream, suddenly realizing that he is lost in the dark. The young server gives a very small, almost imperceptible nod. It is a gesture of quiet, human empathy. It says, "I am here. I see you. I will leave the tea right here." The old man blinks slowly, his heavy eyelids fluttering shut for a moment. He gives a faint, tired exhale, turning his gaze back down to the colored pens. He picks up the teacup, his hand shaking so much that the cup rattles softly against the saucer. He brings it to his lips, letting the warmth of the tea soothe him, if only for a second. The server moves around the table, collecting the crystal ashtrays that are overflowing with gray ash and crushed cigar ends. He replaces them with clean ones, wiping the dark wood of the table with a soft cloth. He performs these small, mundane tasks with an incredible tenderness. In a room where men are trying to bend history to their will with pieces of glass, the server provides the only real, tangible comfort. He cleans. He pours. He cares for them. He watches another hand point to a blue line on the map. The hand is deeply spotted with age, the knuckles swollen. The finger traces the line of a river, lingering on a small printed town. What is that man thinking of? Is he thinking of troops, or is he remembering a summer he once spent on the banks of that very river, long before the sky turned gray? Is he remembering the sound of the water, the feel of the grass, the laughter of children skipping stones? The maps hold so many ghosts. They are covered in the names of places that have been reduced to rubble and ash, yet here, under the warm glow of the lamp, they are still perfectly intact, perfectly safe on the paper. No wonder they stare at it so intensely. The map is the only place left where the world is still whole. The air in the room feels heavy with this collective denial, but it is not a malicious denial. It is a deeply human, desperate clinging to hope, a refusal to step off the edge into the terrifying unknown. They huddle around the light like travelers around a dying campfire in the middle of a frozen forest, trying to draw just a little more warmth from the fading embers. The young server finishes his rounds. He places the dirty ashtrays onto his silver tray. He looks at the men one last time. They are completely absorbed again, leaning closer, their shadows stretching long and distorted across the walls behind them. The shadows look like dark, silent giants, mimicking the movements of the fragile men below. He steps backward, moving softly over the thick carpet. He reaches the heavy wooden door, balancing the tray on one arm, and pulls the brass handle. He slips out into the corridor, pulling the door shut until it clicks softly into the frame, sealing the smoke and the whispers back inside their velvet box. Out in the pale, unchanging light of the hallway, he takes a deep, cleansing breath. The air here, though stale, is free of the heavy, suffocating weight of the conference room. He walks back to the small, quiet pantry. He sets the tray down next to the sink. He turns the metal tap, and warm water flows out, splashing gently into the basin. He takes a bar of simple soap and begins to wash the ash from the crystal bowls. The water runs over his hands, warm and real and incredibly soothing. He watches the gray ash swirl down the drain, disappearing into the dark. He washes the cups, running his thumb over the smooth, curved rims. The simplicity of the task is deeply comforting. He does not have to move armies or redraw the borders of nations. He only has to wash the cups, dry the silver, and prepare the tray for the next time they call for tea. As he works, the rhythmic, hypnotic hum of the bunker's ventilation system wraps around him, a steady, mechanical heartbeat in the wall. He dries his hands on a soft cotton towel, carefully folding it over the edge of the sink. He leans against the cool concrete counter, closing his eyes. He thinks of the colored pens resting on the paper. He thinks of the tired eyes of the men who move them. He feels a quiet, gentle pity for them, trapped in a room of their own making, fighting a war that only exists in the shadows on the map. He takes a small, quiet moment for himself, standing in the pale light of the pantry. He listens to the quiet hum of the ventilators. He feels the solid, immovable concrete beneath his feet. He knows that the shadows will eventually fade, that the paper maps will be rolled up and forgotten, and that all the colored pens will ultimately fall to the floor. But for now, in the stillness of the underground, he simply waits. He rests his hands on the clean silver tray, a quiet guardian of the small, simple comforts, keeping his own quiet vigil while the world above and the men next door slowly slip into the dark. A sudden, bright sound cuts through the heavy, stale air, as delicate and unexpected as a bird flying into a tomb. For weeks, the underground corridors have known only the muffled dragging of tired boots, the hushed, anxious whispers of exhausted men, and the unending, rhythmic drone of the great iron fans. The world down here is built of gray concrete and pale shadows, a heavy, sinking ship of adults carrying the crushing weight of a collapsing empire. But then, the heavy steel doors open, and the atmosphere shifts in an instant. A new rhythm echoes down the long, dimly lit hallway. It is the light, quick, skipping patter of small shoes. A family of siblings has arrived. They step down the steep concrete stairs, their small hands gripping the cold metal railings, their wide, curious eyes taking in the strange, windowless world. They bring with them the faint, lingering scent of the cold winter wind, trapped in the wool of their coats. Their cheeks are still flushed pink from the outside air. To the weary staff of the bunker, watching them descend is like watching a forgotten memory of the sun walk directly into the room. In this fortress of shadows, the children are a burst of impossible color. They wear neat, knitted cardigans in soft blues and warm reds. The older sisters carefully hold the hands of the younger ones, guiding them with a gentle, practiced affection. Their hair is meticulously brushed, catching the pale, artificial light and turning it into something almost golden. They do not look like they belong in a subterranean vault built for war. They look as though they have just stepped away from a picnic in a summer garden, entirely out of place, yet desperately welcome. Almost instantly, the presence of these innocents casts a strange, beautiful spell over the underground. The hardened faces of the guards standing at attention soften just a fraction. Their rigid shoulders relax. The tired secretaries, whose fingers ache from the typewriter keys, look up from their desks, and for the first time in many days, genuine, unforced smiles touch their lips. The bunker, with its thick walls and low ceilings, is terrifying to an adult mind that understands what it means. But to a child, a bunker is just a very large, very strange house with endless corners, winding hallways, and mysterious doors. They do not understand the maps or the whispered fears. They only know that they are together, that the adults are here, and that there is a vast new space to explore. Soon, the quiet, somber halls are filled with a sound that is both heartbreakingly beautiful and profoundly surreal, the sound of a child's unfiltered laughter. It starts as a quiet giggle, echoing softly off the damp walls, and soon blossoms into the joyful noise of a game. They play hide-and-seek among the pillars of power. Imagine the strange poetry of it. A little girl, perhaps no older than 5, stands facing a cold, gray blast door. She covers her eyes with her small hands, pressing her face against the steel, and begins to count aloud. Her voice is a sweet, high melody against the low hum of the ventilator. 1, 2, 3. Down the hall, her brother scurries quietly, his leather shoes squeaking faintly on the floorboards. He ducks behind a heavy velvet curtain, trying to stifle his giggles with his hands. An exhausted aide, carrying a stack of very important, very useless papers, stops in the middle of the corridor to let the boy hide. The aide does not reprimand him. Instead, he offers a conspiratorial wink, standing perfectly still so as not to give away the boy's secret location. For a few fleeting minutes, the war ceases to exist. There is no crumbling city above. There is only the urgent, joyful necessity of not being found. The adults in the bunker find themselves drawn to the children like moths to a gentle, warming flame. The staff become an extended family of quiet aunts and protective uncles. They reach into their pockets to find whatever small treasures they have managed to save, a piece of hard candy wrapped in crinkling cellophane, a slightly bruised apple, a spare pencil. In a quiet corner of the communications room, a weary orderly sits on a wooden crate, his hands rough and stained with ink. A young boy approaches him, entirely unafraid of the orderly's tired, unshaven face. The boy holds out a piece of scrap paper and asks, in a very polite, quiet voice, if the man knows how to draw a horse. The orderly blinks, the heavy exhaustion momentarily lifting from his eyes. He takes the paper. He finds a soft piece of charcoal. And there, in the dim light, leaning against a concrete wall, he draws. He draws a horse galloping across an open field, its mane flying in an invisible wind. He hands it back to the boy, whose eyes light up with pure, unadulterated wonder. The boy thanks him and skips away to show his sisters. The orderly watches him go, swallowing hard past a sudden, tight lump in his throat. In that small, simple interaction, the orderly remembers his own humanity. He remembers that there is still beauty to be made, even in the dark. As the imaginary afternoon stretches into the imaginary evening, the children's energy begins to wane. The bunker does not have the golden glow of a setting sun to tell them it is time to rest, so the adults must create the twilight themselves. The lights in the children's quarters are turned down low. Sometimes, before bed, the older sisters will sing. They stand together in the hallway, their voices blending in perfect, delicate harmony. They sing old folk songs, lullabies about deep green forests, silver moons, and quiet, sleeping valleys. Their voices are so clear, so incredibly pure, that they seem to dissolve the very concrete around them. The adults stop whatever they are doing. The typewriters fall silent. The hushed conversations end. Men and women lean against the walls in the corridor, closing their eyes, letting the music wash over them. For a few precious moments, the terrible weight of their reality is lifted. A tear slips down the cheek of a hardened guard, tracing a clean line through the dust on his face. He does not wipe it away. He simply listens, mourning the world that these children should have had, and fiercely loving the grace they bring to this buried one. Then comes the gentle, necessary ritual of bedtime. It is a profound attempt to maintain the soft boundaries of normal life. In the washroom, water is poured into a basin. A mother, her face drawn but her hands infinitely gentle, washes the faces of her children. The water is cold, but the towel is soft. She brushes their hair, the rhythmic strokes of the bristle brush acting as a physical lullaby, soothing the fraying edges of the day. They are dressed in their nightclothes, soft flannels, and pale cottons. They climb into the narrow, stacked bunk beds, their small bodies sinking into the thin mattresses. They pull the heavy woolen blankets up to their chins. A young secretary pulls up a wooden chair beside the lowest bunk. She holds a worn, cloth-bound book in her hands. The children look at her with heavy, sleepy eyes, waiting for the magic words that transport them to another place. She opens the book, smooths the page, and begins to read in a low, velvet whisper. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away. Her voice is a steady, comforting stream. She reads of brave princes, of talking animals, of magical forests where the trees whisper secrets to the wind. The children listen, completely captivated by the story. They do not know about the maps in the other room. They do not know about the heavy silence of the men moving colored pens. To them, the only monsters are the ones in the storybook, and those monsters can always be defeated before the final page. The secretary watches as their eyelids flutter and finally close. The breathing in the room changes, becoming slow, deep, and perfectly synchronized. It is the rhythmic, peaceful breathing of innocent sleep. She stops reading. She closes the book with a very soft, barely audible thump. She does not stand up right away. She stays in the chair, just watching them. In the dim, pale light, their sleeping faces are perfect, unbothered, and serene. They are a profound contrast to everything else in this subterranean world. They are the fragile, beating heart of a place made of stone. She reaches out, her hand trembling slightly, and gently tucks a stray blanket around the shoulder of the youngest boy. He sighs in his sleep, turning his face toward the warmth of her hand. Out in the corridor, the deep, mechanical hum of the ventilator continues its unending drone. But inside this small room, the sound is softened, absorbed by the presence of the sleeping children. The adults who pass by the open door tread very, very lightly. They walk on the tips of their toes, terrified of waking the dreamers. They are all drawn to this doorway, pausing just to look inside. It gives them something precious to guard. It gives them a reason to stand a little taller, to speak a little softer, to hold back the darkness for just one more night. As the artificial midnight settles over the bunker, the footsteps of the innocent are finally still. But the warmth they brought into the cold gray halls lingers, a delicate, beautiful ghost, wrapping the exhausted inhabitants in a quiet, heartbreaking peace, watching over them as they, too, finally close their eyes. Somewhere far above the heavy concrete ceiling, the first green shoots of spring are pushing quietly through the thawed earth, entirely unseen. Up there, the winter is finally loosening its grip. The gray, heavy skies that have draped over the city for months are beginning to break, revealing sudden, breathtaking patches of pale blue. The air is turning sweet, carrying the faint, hopeful scent of wet soil and new life. In a normal year, the windows would be thrown wide open. People would walk through the parks without their heavy woolen coats, turning their faces upward to catch the gentle warmth of the returning sun. The world above is remembering how to bloom. But down here, in the buried world of the bunker, the seasons do not exist. There is no breeze to carry the scent of rain. There is no morning frost to melt away, and there is no twilight to soften the hard edges of the day. The air remains cool, dry, and eternally still, smelling faintly of old paper, wet cement, and the metallic tang of the ventilation fans. The only way the men and women living in this subterranean twilight know that spring has arrived is by looking at the small, paper calendars pinned to their doors. They cross off the days with pencils, watching April slowly unfold in the dark, separated from the turning of the earth by meters of impenetrable stone. And so, to survive this suffocating stillness, the inhabitants must create their own seasons. They must invent their own light. In the evenings, as the invisible sun sets on the world above, a deeply surreal and beautiful ritual begins to unfold in the dim, narrow corridors. It is time for tea. In a small, low-ceilinged room that serves as a makeshift gathering space, an orderly carefully spreads a white linen cloth over a simple wooden table. He smooths out the creases with the flat of his hand, a slow, methodical motion that brings a strange sense of order to the chaotic reality of their lives. In this windowless room, bathed in the unwavering yellow glow of caged electric bulbs, this piece of white linen is a blank canvas of civilization. It is a quiet refusal to let the darkness take everything. Then comes the porcelain. From a sturdy cardboard box, kept safely away from the damp floors, they lift the delicate cups and saucers. They are fragile, beautiful things, remnants of the grand chancellery above. The china is painted with tiny, intricate violets, pale pink roses, and twisting vines of green ivy. For the secretaries, the nurses, and the exhausted aides gathering in the room, these painted blossoms are the only spring garden they will see this year. People begin to drift into the room, emerging from the shadows of the long hallway. They move softly, their footsteps muted, carrying the heavy exhaustion of the day on their shoulders. But as they cross the threshold into the sitting room, a subtle transformation occurs. They leave their panic at the door. A young secretary enters, wearing a simple blouse she has carefully pressed beneath her mattress to keep the collar crisp. She reaches up to adjust a hairpin, offering a polite, soft smile to the room. An older officer steps in behind her, his gray uniform brushed free of lint, his posture slightly straighter than it was an hour ago. They are stepping onto a stage, playing the parts of normal people living a normal life, and the performance is entirely out of love for one another. They sit in a circle, pulling up wooden chairs and small stools, forming a quiet congregation of survivors. The tea is poured. The sound of the hot water filling the fragile cups is incredibly soothing, a bright, clean sound that cuts through the unending, low hum of the bunker's ventilators. Steam rises into the cool air, carrying the faint, comforting aroma of chamomile and dried mint. The orderly moves around the table, offering a small silver bowl of sugar. There is very little left, but he offers it with the grace of a banquet host. The conversations that begin to hum around the table are a masterpiece of gentle deflection. It is an unspoken, fiercely guarded rule: they do not talk about the war. They do not talk about the maps, or the shrinking borders, or the terrifying sounds that sometimes echo down the stairwells. To speak of those things would be to shatter the delicate porcelain of their shared illusion. Instead, they speak in hushed, velvet whispers of the before. A middle-aged clerk, cradling his warm teacup in both hands, speaks in a soft, rumbling voice about his grandmother's home in a small village far away. He describes the way the afternoon light used to filter through the lace curtains in her kitchen. He talks about the smell of baking bread and the sound of the neighbors' dog barking in the distance. As he speaks, the others close their eyes, letting his words paint the room. For a few precious minutes, they are no longer surrounded by gray concrete. They are sitting in that sunlit kitchen, safe and warm. Beside him, a nurse with deep, dark circles beneath her eyes smiles gently. She shares a funny, quiet memory of losing her hat to a sudden gust of wind on a bridge a lifetime ago. The story brings a ripple of genuine, hushed laughter to the table. It is a fragile sound, this laughter. It does not echo loudly. It is kept close to the chest, small and intimate, shared only among those who understand its true value. In these moments, the simple act of holding a teacup becomes an anchor. The warmth of the porcelain seeps into their cold palms, a tangible reminder that they are alive, that they can still feel comfort. The smooth, curved rim of the cup against their lips is a tether to humanity. They sip slowly, making the hot water last, drawing out the ritual for as long as the evening will allow. And yet, despite the brave smiles and the polite nods, there is a heavy, unspoken dread resting just behind their tired eyes. If you look closely, you can see it in the way a young woman stares a moment too long at the painted roses on her saucer, her mind drifting toward a terrible, looming horizon. You can see it in the slight tremor of a man's hand as he sets his cup down, the silver spoon rattling ever so faintly against the china. They are terrified. They know that this underground world cannot last forever. They know that the spring blossoming above them belongs to a world they may never walk in again. But they carry this terror in absolute silence, bearing the weight of it themselves so that the person sitting next to them does not have to. Suddenly, the bunker gives a low, deep sigh. It is a vibration, coming from far away, a rhythmic trembling deep in the earth. The muffled thud of distant artillery sends a shockwave rolling through the soil, passing through the reinforced walls of their subterranean tomb. The electric lights flicker once, a brief flutter of the heart, before steadying again. From the ceiling above the table, a fine, pale gray dust begins to fall. It drifts down through the warm light of the bulbs like a strangely silent, warm snow. It is the pulverized dust of the city above, the ash of their collapsing world, filtering down into their sanctuary. The reaction in the room is profoundly quiet. There is no screaming. There is no sudden panic or rushing for the doors. They have lived with the trembling earth for too long to be startled by it. Instead, a young woman simply reaches out, gracefully moving her hand over her teacup to shield the dark liquid from the falling ash. The older officer beside her bows his head slightly, closing his eyes as a fine layer of gray settles onto the shoulders of his dark uniform. They sit in silence, letting the tremor pass, waiting for the earth to settle. When the deep vibration finally fades, leaving only the steady drone of the ventilator once more, the room returns to its quiet hum. The orderly takes a small white cloth from his pocket and gently, methodically, wipes the dust from the edge of the wooden table. The young woman lowers her hand from her teacup and takes another slow, deliberate sip. The bravery of this moment is breathtaking. It is not the loud, sweeping courage of a battlefield, with flags flying and trumpets sounding. It is the quiet, domestic heroism of everyday people. It is the absolute refusal to surrender their humanity to the dark. It is the profound courage of finishing a cup of tea, of maintaining one's manners and grace, while the world shatters just a few meters above their heads. As the evening deepens into the artificial night, the teapot finally grows cold. The painted roses on the delicate porcelain are slowly swallowed by the creeping shadows at the edges of the room. The tea party is coming to an end. They begin to say their goodnights. The words are exceptionally soft, lingering in the stale air like protective spells cast over one another. Sleep well, they whisper. Rest now. Until tomorrow. They stand up, their chairs scraping softly against the floor. They take one last look at the table, at the delicate cups sitting in the pale light, coated with a faint dusting of gray. They carry the memory of this fragile normalcy with them as they step back out into the dim, cold corridor. They return to their small, narrow cots. They take off their shoes, moving quietly so as not to wake their sleeping neighbors. They pull the heavy, scratchy woolen blankets up to their chins, seeking warmth in the cool air of the underground. The lights in the bunker are dimmed, leaving only a faint, ghostly illumination to guide the night watch. In the dark, the young secretary closes her eyes. She can still feel the lingering warmth of the teacup against her palms. She can still see the intricate, painted violets in her mind's eye. She focuses on those flowers, imagining them growing tall and strong in a bright, sunlit garden, feeling the warm spring breeze rustling their leaves. She lets the deep, mechanical lullaby of the ventilator wash over her, carrying her away from the concrete walls, away from the dust, and away from the fear. She drifts into sleep holding onto the delicate, beautiful fragments of a normal life, a quiet guardian of her own spirit, waiting for a dawn that she can only dream of. A single, trembling flame pushes back the crushing dark of the subterranean world, offering a fragile warmth to hands that have forgotten the sun. Time in the bunker is an illusion, measured only by the changing of the weary guards and the rhythmic, hollow ticking of pocket watches. Yet, the small paper calendars pinned to the concrete walls insist that it is late April. It is a day that, in the world above, was once marked by grand parades, the ringing of bells, and the fluttering of countless banners in the sweet spring wind. But down here, beneath the ruined gardens and the shattered streets of Berlin, there is no wind. There is only the damp, terribly still air, and the quiet realization that today is a birthday. It is the 56th birthday of the man whose shadow stretches over all of them, a milestone reached at the very edge of an unimaginable abyss. How does one celebrate the gift of a birth when everything else in the world is slowly slipping away? For the men and women who live in these dim, narrow corridors, the day presents a strange, surreal challenge. They are completely exhausted. Their eyes are hollowed by a lack of sleep, their nerves frayed by the constant, vibrating hum of the ventilation fans and the muffled tremors of the earth above. Yet, human nature clings fiercely to its familiar rituals. Rituals provide a comforting rhythm. They offer a familiar, solid shore to swim toward when the waters of reality become too dark and turbulent to navigate. And so, a quiet, unspoken decision ripples through the staff. They will observe the day. They will go through the gentle motions of a gathering, not out of grand devotion, but out of a desperate, deeply human need for a few moments of normalcy. In the small, hidden corners of the bunker, preparations begin in absolute silence. It is an act of quiet, everyday heroism to try and make something beautiful in a place built of thick, unyielding stone. A young secretary, her fingers stained with the faint blue of typewriter ribbon, smooths out the wrinkles of her best skirt. She carefully pins her hair back in the reflection of a small mirror, wishing she had a bright ribbon to weave through the strands, settling instead for the quiet dignity of simply looking her best. In a tiny pantry down the hall, an orderly searches through the dwindling supplies. He moves with a slow, practiced reverence. He finds a clean, white linen cloth, folded tightly and smelling faintly of starch and old wood. He carries it into one of the cramped conference rooms and drapes it over a heavy wooden table, smoothing the fabric with the flat of his palm. In the pale, artificial yellow light of the bunker, the white fabric seems almost blinding. It is a blank page. A clean slate in a world of gray dust. And then, the most precious treasure of all is brought forth. Candles. They are simple, ordinary tapers, perhaps scavenged from a forgotten desk drawer or saved in a box for emergencies. But as they are placed carefully onto the center of the table, they become something entirely sacred. An age strikes a match. The sharp, sudden scuff of the sulfur echoes briefly against the stone walls. A tiny plume of smoke curls into the air, followed instantly by the soft, warm blooming of a golden flame. One by one, the wicks catch the fire. As the candles are lit, a profound and gentle transformation washes over the small room. The harsh, unchanging glare of the electric bulbs is switched off, leaving only the living, breathing light of the fire. The bunker, usually so cold, so clinical and vast, suddenly softens. The golden light dances across the gray concrete, painting the ceiling with shifting, fluid shadows. It is a warm, forgiving light. It fills the room with the comforting scent of melting beeswax. For the first time in weeks, the inhabitants are bathed in a light that flickers and moves, a gentle illumination that reminds them of hearth fires, of winter holidays, and of quiet evenings spent safely at home. Slowly, the inner circle begins to gather. They step through the heavy doorway, leaving the pale, endless corridors behind, and step into the warm halo of the room. They move with a quiet, solemn grace. The men wear their uniforms, brushed meticulously clean of the fine ash that constantly drifts down from the ceilings. The women wear their bravest faces. They look at the table, at the flickering candles, and a collective, silent sigh seems to escape from their tired chests. To watch this gathering is to witness a heartbreaking pantomime of a life that no longer exists. They stand around the table, their faces illuminated from below by the soft firelight. The candlelight works a gentle, merciful magic on their exhausted features. It fills in the dark hollows beneath their eyes. It softens the deep, heavy lines of worry etched around their mouths. In this golden glow, they look younger, softer, and profoundly human. They look like ordinary people gathered for a quiet celebration while a winter storm rages outside. But the storm is right above them, and they know it. The smiles they offer to one another are forced, yet deeply tender in their effort. When a secretary offers a quiet word of greeting to an older officer, her smile does not quite reach her eyes, but it reaches his heart. It is a smile that quietly says, "I am terrified too, but I am standing here with you." They exchange soft, polite murmurs. They speak of the warmth of the room. They comment on the beauty of the simple table. They cling to these small, safe topics, terrified that if they speak of anything real, the delicate, porcelain illusion of the evening will shatter into 1,000 unfixable pieces. When the guest of honor enters, a shadow moving wearily among shadows, his shoulders are bowed beneath the invisible, crushing weight of a lost world. The greetings he receives are muted, delivered in hushed, respectful whispers that barely disturb the candle flames. Handshakes are exchanged, but the grips are weak, lacking the vitality of the years before. There is no joy in the room, only a heavy, suffocating atmosphere of duty and tragic finality. The people gathered around him look at his face, illuminated by the trembling light, and they see the undeniable reflection of their own impending end. As they stand together, listening to the soft, rhythmic ticking of a pocket watch and the endless, mechanical hum of the ventilator beyond the heavy door, a heavy realization settles over the room like a thick velvet blanket. They look around the circle, making quiet, lingering eye contact with the faces they have come to know so well in the dark. They see the young orderly who always saves an extra lump of sugar for their tea. They see the nurse who speaks in a voice like a soft lullaby when the walls tremble. They see the friends they have made in this buried world. And they know, with absolute, chilling certainty that this is the last time. This is the final gathering. There will be no 57th birthday. There will be no next spring. The world they belong to is turning to ash above their heads, and the thick concrete walls of their sanctuary are finally closing in. The grief that fills the room is not a loud, weeping grief for a crumbling empire, but a profound, intensely personal sorrow. It is the sorrow of mourning their own lives. It is the quiet agony of severing the gentle bonds they have formed with one another. It is the heavy realization of knowing that the story is over, and that all that remains is the turning of the final, painful page. Yet, in the face of this terrifying truth, there is no panic. There are no dramatic declarations or sudden tears. There is only a quiet, dignified resilience. A young woman reaches out and gently touches the sleeve of her friend standing beside her. It is a tiny movement, barely visible in the dim light, but it carries the heavy weight of 1,000 unspoken goodbyes. They hold on to each other with their presence, offering the simple, profound comfort of not being entirely alone in the dark. The hour stretches on, beautifully suspended in the amber light. They sip from small glasses, the liquid catching the firelight and throwing tiny, warm reflections onto the white tablecloth. They share small, broken pieces of memory, speaking in voices so soft they are almost absorbed by the heavy walls. They are building a temporary shelter out of whispers and candlelight, a fragile refuge where they can hide their hearts for just a little while longer. But candles cannot burn forever. Slowly, inevitably, the wicks begin to drown in small pools of melted wax. The flames flutter and gasp, casting long, erratic shadows that dance wildly across the ceiling like ghosts preparing to depart. One by one, the lights begin to fail. A flame sputters, releasing a thin, curling ribbon of gray smoke, and vanishes. The shadows creep closer, stepping over the threshold to reclaim the edges of the room. As the light dims, the spell begins to break. The heavy reality of the bunker presses back in against them, cold and uncompromising. The forced smiles slowly fade, replaced once again by the solemn, exhausted masks they must wear to survive the waking hours. The quiet murmurs cease entirely. The gathering has come to its natural, somber end. There are no grand farewells. They simply begin to drift away, stepping out of the fading warmth and back into the cold, pale corridors. They walk softly, their heads bowed, carrying the faint, sweet scent of melted wax in the wool of their clothes. The young secretary returns to her narrow cot. She does not turn on her small reading lamp. She sits on the edge of her bed in the dark, pulling her heavy blanket around her shoulders, staring into the gray nothingness of the room. In the empty common room, the orderly returns to clear the table. He leans over and gently blows out the final, struggling candle. The sudden darkness is absolute, deep, and profound. He carefully folds the white linen cloth, packing away the temporary magic they had managed to summon. The bunker returns to its eternal, artificial twilight. The low, mechanical drone of the ventilation fan seems louder now, rushing in to fill the silence left behind by the hushed voices. Deep beneath the earth, the people of the bunker close their eyes. They carry the memory of the golden light into their sleep, a small, fragile comfort to hold tightly against the encroaching dark. They dream of the warmth, of the quiet companionship, and of a world where candles are lit for joy, and not as a final, desperate vigil in the concrete night. They rest, surrendering to the hum of the great iron lungs, waiting in the shadows for whatever tomorrow may bring. There is a profound and heavy grace in the final letting go of a hand you know you will never hold again. Deep within the subterranean world, beneath the crushing weight of the earth and the endless gray of the concrete, a subtle shift begins to ripple through the stale air. It is not announced with a loud voice or the ringing of a bell. Instead, it moves like a quiet rumor, a soft breath traveling down the dim, pale corridors. The impossible has happened. Permission has been granted to leave. The heavy steel bulkheads, which for so long have felt like the absolute edges of the universe, are suddenly open to those who wish to try their luck in the ruined world above. For months, the people of the bunker have been bound together by the thick, unyielding walls. They have become a strange, quiet family, forged in the artificial light and the unending, hypnotic hum of the great ventilation fans. They have shared their fears, their scarce rations, and their whispered memories of the sun. But now, that tightly woven fabric is beginning to gently, painfully unravel. The time has come for the parting of the ways. In the small, cramped dormitories, the packing begins. It is a desperately quiet endeavor. You can hear the soft, papery rustle of a cardboard suitcase being opened, the hinges squeaking faintly in the still air. A young woman kneels on the cold floor beside her narrow cot. She has very little to take with her. The bunker stripped them of their possessions long ago, leaving only what was essential. Watch her hands as she folds a heavy woolen sweater. She moves with a slow, deliberate tenderness, as if the garment itself might break. She smooths the rough fabric, tucking the sleeves inward, pressing it flat to fit into the small case. She does not pack for a bright future, she packs for a terrifying, unknown journey. Beside the sweater, she places a small, slightly crumpled photograph of her parents, a worn pair of leather gloves, and a half-written letter she never had the chance to send. The physical weight of the suitcase is light, but the emotional weight of picking it up is almost unbearable. To leave the bunker is to step out of the dark, known safety of the tomb and into the violent, chaotic mystery of the crumbling city. It requires a breathtaking kind of everyday heroism. It takes immense courage to choose the terrifying open air over the familiar, suffocating shadows. She closes the lid, the metal clasp snapping shut with a sharp, final click that echoes loudly in the tiny room. Out in the long hallways, the atmosphere has transformed into a sanctuary of farewells. The pale yellow electric bulbs cast long, soft shadows across the floor, illuminating small pockets of people huddled together. The normal, hushed urgency of the bunker's routine has vanished entirely. There is no more typing. There is no more hurrying with silver trays of tea. Time itself seems to have slowed down, thickening in the air, allowing these final moments to stretch and linger. Everywhere you look, there are quiet, devastating goodbyes. Words, once so necessary for comfort, suddenly feel clumsy and entirely inadequate. What can be said when the world is ending and you are walking in opposite directions? Instead of speaking, they hold on to one another. Two young secretaries, who have shared the same small desk and learned to synchronize their breathing with the deep thrum of the ventilator, stand facing each other near a concrete pillar. Their eyes are shining with unshed tears. One reaches out, her trembling fingers gently touching the collar of her friend's heavy coat, adjusting it against the cold she knows is waiting above. It is a tiny, maternal gesture, filled with an ocean of unspoken love. Then, they step into an embrace. It is not a quick, polite hug. It is a desperate, fiercely tight clinging. They wrap their arms around each other, burying their faces in the rough wool of their coats. They close their eyes, trying to memorize the exact feeling of this moment. They breathe in the scent of damp air, old lavender soap, and the familiar, comforting presence of a friend. In the quiet of the hallway, you can hear the soft, muffled sound of a sob, instantly swallowed by the heavy fabric. They hold on, swaying just slightly, suspended in a beautiful, heartbreaking bubble of pure humanity, entirely ignoring the war that brought them here. Further down the corridor, an older officer stands with a young orderly. The rigid lines of military rank, the stiff salutes and the formal titles, have completely melted away in the pale light. They are just two tired men standing at the edge of the world. The older man reaches into the deep pocket of his gray tunic. He pulls out a small, worn silver pocket watch. The metal is smooth and warm from being carried close to the chest for so many years. He takes the young orderly's hand, pressing the watch firmly into his palm, and closes the boy's fingers around it. The older man does not speak of duty or victory. He only looks into the young man's eyes, his own eyes heavy with exhaustion and a deep, paternal sorrow. He places his other hand heavily, warmly, on the boy's shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. It is a silent command to survive. To carry the time forward, out of the dark and into whatever light is left. The young orderly nods, his throat too tight to speak, slipping the silver watch into his own pocket like a sacred talisman. Slowly, the departing souls begin to move toward the stairs. They walk with heavy, hesitant steps, their leather shoes making a soft, rhythmic scraping sound on the concrete. They carry their small suitcases and cloth bags, their shoulders hunched slightly as if preparing for a blow from the wind. As they reach the bottom of the long, steep staircase, the air begins to change. The stale, warm, perfectly still air of the bunker gives way to a creeping, icy draft tumbling down from the heavy steel doors above. It smells of dust, of smoke, and of a cold, ruined spring. They pause at the first step. They turn around, looking back down the long corridor one last time. They see the pale yellow lights stretching into the distance. They see the gray walls that protected them. And they see the faces of the ones who must stay behind. For every person who climbs those stairs, there is someone who remains in the shadows, watching them go. Some stay out of a profound sense of misplaced loyalty. Some stay because they are simply too tired to run anymore. And some stay because the fear of the unknown above is greater than the fear of the inevitable below. The ones left behind stand quietly in the doorways of their small offices. They offer small, fragile waves. A gentle nod of the head. A brave, forced smile that trembles at the corners. They are the silent guardians of the underground, witnessing the exodus of their friends, feeling the space around them grow larger, emptier, and immeasurably colder. The climbers turn back to the stairs. They begin the ascent. Up, out of the artificial twilight. Up, away from the hypnotic lullaby of the ventilator. Up, into the terrifying expanse of the sky. When the heavy steel doors finally groan shut behind the last departing group, the sound echoes through the bunker with a terrifying, absolute finality. It is a deep, resonant thud that vibrates through the floorboards and settles into the very bones of the people left standing in the hall. The silence that follows is profound. It is not a peaceful silence. It is the heavy, ringing silence of a sudden emptiness. A young woman, one of the few secretaries who chose to remain, turns slowly away from the staircase. She walks back down the corridor toward her office. The hallway, which just an hour ago was filled with the soft murmurs of her friends, now feels vast and hollow. Her own footsteps seem too loud, bouncing off the damp walls, reminding her of her profound isolation. She enters her workspace. She looks at the empty wooden chair beside hers. She looks at the second typewriter, now covered with a dark cloth, sitting silent and still. She walks over to the desk and gently runs her fingertips along the cool metal edge. A stray hairpin rests on the blotter, left behind in the rush of the departure. She picks it up, holding the tiny piece of wire in her palm, staring at it until her vision blurs. She sits down in her chair. She folds her hands in her lap. She closes her eyes and takes a long, slow breath of the stale, filtered air. The bunker is a place of ghosts now. The memories of the departed linger in every corner. They are in the faint scent of perfume still hanging in the dormitory. They are in the half-empty teacups left abandoned on the tables. They are in the echo of laughter that seems to still be trapped in the concrete. The great iron lungs of the ventilation system continue to spin, humming their low, mechanical note, but the sound is different now. It is no longer a shared lullaby. It is a lonely, solitary drone, breathing for a world that has suddenly shrunk to half its size. But even in this crushing emptiness, there is a quiet, beautiful resilience. The ones who remain do not collapse. They do not scream into the void. They slowly, deliberately, return to their routines. They straighten the papers on their desks. They smooth the blankets on their cots. They carry the memories of their departed friends like warm embers in their chests, a secret fire to ward off the encroaching dark. As the artificial night settles once more over the Führerbunker, the separated souls look toward sleep. Deep underground, a woman closes her eyes and prays for the friend who is walking through the ruins. And somewhere above, hidden in the rubble under a cold, starless sky, another woman closes her eyes and remembers the quiet warmth of the bunker. They are parted by stone and circumstance, walking entirely different paths into the unknown, but in the gentle, forgiving realm of dreams, they hold on to one another. They rest in the shared quiet of the night, bound forever by the memory of a lingering embrace, and the brave, beautiful sorrow of a whispered goodbye. Even the thickest walls of stone cannot keep the heavy, breaking heart of the world from touching the earth. For so long, the people living beneath the ruined city have known only the deep, unnatural stillness of their buried sanctuary. They have grown accustomed to a world without wind, without the patter of rain against a window pane, and without the rustle of leaves in the changing seasons. The only sounds they have known are the soft, shuffling footsteps in the pale corridors, the hushed whispers of exhausted colleagues, and the eternal, mechanical lullaby of the great ventilation fans. They have been wrapped in a cocoon of quiet, suspended in an artificial twilight. But now, a new rhythm has found them in the dark. It does not announce itself with a sudden crash. It begins as a feeling, long before it becomes a sound. Deep in the soles of their feet, pressing through the thick leather of their shoes, they feel a subtle, rolling tremble. It is a low, heavy vibration, moving through the earth like the slow heartbeat of a sleeping giant far above. Then comes the sound. It is muffled by the meters of packed dirt and reinforced concrete, stripped of its sharp edges. It reaches the bunker not as the violent breaking of the city, but as a deep, resonant rumble. It sounds like a distant summer thunderstorm rolling across a dark horizon, or the heavy, rhythmic crashing of ocean waves against a distant cliff. The outside world, which they have tried so hard to lock away behind heavy steel doors, is finally knocking on the ceiling. At first, when the rolling thuds begin, a profound silence falls over the inhabitants. The typewriters in the small offices stop their rhythmic clattering. The quiet conversations in the hallways trail off into nothing. The women and men simply stand still, tilting their heads slightly, listening to the deep sighs of the earth. They do not run. There is nowhere to run to. They simply wait, breathing softly, as the heavy vibration travels down the walls, through the floorboards, and into their very bones. With every deep, distant thud, the bunker gives a gentle shudder. And with every shudder, a fine, pale gray dust is shaken loose from the low ceiling. It is a deeply surreal, terribly beautiful sight. The dust falls through the warm, yellow halos of the electric bulbs like a strange, indoor snowstorm. It is the pulverized memory of the city above, the ash of their collapsing world, filtering down through the cracks to rest upon their shoulders. In a narrow office, a young secretary sits perfectly still at her wooden desk. She watches, mesmerized, as the gray powder drifts down through the air. It lands softly on her dark wool cardigan. It settles onto the black ribbon of her typewriter and dusts the crisp, white edges of her neatly stacked papers. She reaches out with a slow, deliberate hand and gently brushes the dust from the keys. She does not weep. She simply wipes the slate clean. Over and over again, throughout the long, timeless hours, she and the others perform this quiet ritual. They brush the dust from their sleeves. They wipe the gray film from the glass faces of the clocks. They sweep the floorboards with soft brooms. In a world that is shaking apart, this simple act of cleaning, of maintaining a tiny corner of order, becomes a profound act of everyday heroism. It is their gentle, stubborn refusal to be buried alive. The psychological toll of the trembling earth is heavy, pressing down on their tired minds like the physical weight of the concrete above. You cannot hide from a sound that lives inside the walls. It creates a strange, deeply shared intimacy among the people in the bunker. Words become entirely useless against the deep, rolling thunder, so they learn to speak to one another in the spaces between the noise. They speak in silent glances. Walk down the long, dim corridor during one of the rumbles, and you will see it. An older officer, his shoulders bowed with the weight of invisible burdens, leans against a concrete pillar. Across the hallway, a young nurse stands holding a stack of folded linens. As a particularly deep vibration shakes the floor, their eyes meet. In that quiet exchange of a glance, there is an entire universe of human connection. The look says, "I feel it too. I am frightened too. But we are still standing here together." The officer gives a very small, almost imperceptible nod. The nurse softens the tension in her jaw and offers a faint, brave smile. It is a fleeting, beautiful moment of absolute understanding. In the face of the overwhelming dark, they anchor each other with simply witnessing one another's fear and choosing to be gentle with it. In the small pantry, where the illusion of domestic life is fiercely protected, a delicate scene unfolds. An orderly has just poured a cup of warm tea into a fragile porcelain cup. The cup sits on a matching saucer, painted with pale, fading roses. He sets it on the wooden counter and steps back. A deep thud rolls through the earth. The floorboards tremble. The orderly watches the teacup. Inside the white porcelain, the dark amber liquid begins to shake. Tiny, perfect concentric rings ripple across the surface of the tea, bouncing off the edges of the cup and returning to the center. It is a masterpiece of physics, a delicate, fragile response to the terrible force above. He stares at the trembling liquid, his hands resting on the edge of the counter. The rings in the tea are a mirror of the anxiety rippling through his own chest. But then, the vibration passes. The earth settles. The rings in the cup slowly fade, leaving the surface of the tea smooth and calm once more. He takes a long, slow breath, picking up the cup and wrapping his cold hands around its returning warmth. He reminds himself that, like the tea, the trembling will eventually pass, and stillness will return. As the hours blur into an endless twilight, the rhythm of the distant shells becomes the new measure of time. It replaces the ticking of the clocks. The inhabitants learn to navigate their days around the sway of the bunker. They walk with a slightly wider stance, like sailors learning to balance on the deck of a ship navigating a restless, storm-tossed sea. In the deepest corner of the night shift, when the bunker is as quiet as it will ever be, a young aide sits on the edge of his narrow cot. The small lamp on his bedside table casts a pool of golden light over a piece of blank paper resting on his knee. He holds a fountain pen, the nib hovering just above the page. He is writing to his mother. The building gives a low, rumbling sigh. The paper on his knee trembles, and his hand shakes, leaving a small, jagged mark of ink on the page. He pauses. He listens to the heavy thud fading into the earth. How can he possibly describe this to her? How can he tell her about the dust, and the shaking walls, and the feeling of being trapped inside a drum? He decides he cannot. He loves her too much to send his terror through the mail. So, he rests the pen on the paper again and writes a beautiful, protective lie. "It is quiet here tonight," he writes, his handwriting smooth and careful. "There is a storm passing far overhead, but we are safe and dry. Do not worry for me. I am resting well, and the others are kind." He pours his quiet resilience into the letter, absorbing the fear so that she will not have to feel it. He signs his name, folding the paper with gentle, precise creases. He places it in an envelope, sealing away his deepest anxieties, choosing to send only love out into the broken world. It is a quiet, solitary sacrifice, made in the dim light of a trembling room. Sometimes, the power grid flickers as the city above takes another heavy blow. The pale yellow lights in the corridors dim to a faint, ghostly orange, hovering on the very edge of complete darkness. In those brief, terrifying seconds of shadow, the human spirit reaches out. A hand, cold and trembling, reaches blindly across a narrow table, searching in the dimming light. It finds another hand waiting there. Fingers intertwine. Palms pressed together. It is a desperate, wordless grasping for an anchor. A warm, firm squeeze that whispers, "I am right here. You are not alone." When the lights finally surge back to life, pushing the shadows back into the corners, the hands slowly, gently part. But the lingering warmth remains on their skin, a quiet armor against the next wave of trembling. Eventually, the body's need for rest overcomes even the deepest fears. The exhaustion of waiting, of bracing for the next rumble, becomes a heavy blanket that pulls their eyelids down. They must learn to sleep inside the storm. They lie on their small, narrow cots, pulling the rough woolen blankets up to their chins. They turn their faces away from the center of the room, looking toward the heavy concrete walls. They watch the fine, gray dust drifting slowly through the pale light, catching the glow like tiny, floating stars. They listen to the deep, rolling thunder. Instead of fighting it, they begin to surrender to its rhythm. They let their breathing match the slow, heavy rise and fall of the earth. They turn the terrifying sound into a strange, heavy lullaby. Thud. Breathe in. Thud. Breathe out. The bunker rocks them gently in the dark, a concrete cradle suspended in the deep. They close their eyes, wrapped in the extraordinary resilience of the human mind. They find a fragile peace in the spaces between the tremors, dreaming of green fields that do not shake, of skies that hold only clouds, and of a quiet, unbroken morning that they hope, with all their weary hearts, is waiting for them at the end of the long, trembling night. In the deepest, most hollowed-out hour of the night, a single piece of blank paper is rolled into a machine, ready to catch the final, heavy breath of a falling world. There is a specific kind of quiet that settles over the bunker when the artificial day finally gives way to the artificial night. It is a thick, velvet silence, pressed down by the immense weight of the sleeping earth above. The great iron lungs of the ventilation fans continue their unending, rhythmic drone, but the human noises, the shuffling of boots, the hushed conversations, the polite clinking of teacups, have all softly faded away. The corridors are empty, bathed in the pale, unchanging yellow light of the caged bulbs. The shadows stretch long and still across the gray concrete. It is the time of night when dreams usually come to carry tired minds away from their fears. But in one small, softly lit room, sleep has not arrived. A young secretary sits at a modest wooden desk. She is a woman who, in another life, in a gentle world, might be spending her evenings reading poetry by a window or walking through a quiet park with a friend. But here, buried in the earth, she is the keeper of the words. She has been called from her narrow cot in the dead of night, asked to bring her shorthand pad and her perfectly sharpened pencils. She moves with a quiet, practiced grace, smoothing the fabric of her skirt, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She takes her seat, resting her hands softly in her lap. The room is heavy with a strange, solemn anticipation. In the shadows just beyond the warm pool of light cast by her desk lamp, a man is pacing. His footsteps are slow, dragging slightly against the carpet. He is a man who once spoke to millions, whose voice once filled vast stadiums and echoed across a continent. But now, his world has shrunk to these few concrete rooms, and his voice is tired, reduced to a raspy, exhausted whisper. The young woman waits, her pencil hovering just a fraction of an inch above the pale green lines of her notepad. Her heart beats softly, a quiet, rapid flutter in her chest like a captive bird. She knows, as everyone in the bunker intuitively knows, that the end is standing just outside the heavy steel doors. And so, in her gentle, hopeful heart, she believes that tonight will bring a profound release. She thinks, perhaps, she is about to write down the words that will finally stop the trembling of the earth. She imagines taking dictation for a quiet surrender, a message of peace, a final, merciful farewell that will allow the surviving soldiers to put down their weapons and return to their mothers. She holds her breath, waiting for the relief. The man in the shadows stops pacing. He takes a long, ragged breath, and he begins to speak. The young secretary's hand moves instantly, instinctively, translating the spoken syllables into the elegant, flowing curves and dashes of shorthand. She is a master of her craft, her pencil gliding silently across the paper, catching every word before it can fall to the floor. But as the sentences begin to form in her mind, a profound, quiet sorrow washes over her. The words filling the room are not words of peace. They are not a gentle release, nor an apology to the shattered world above. They are the same bitter grievances, the same cold accusations, and the same dark, unchanging illusions that brought them all into this subterranean tomb. The man is dictating his final political testament, carving his anger into the history books, entirely blind to the human suffering breathing softly in the very room with him. The young woman does not weep. She does not stop writing. She simply lowers her eyes, fixing her gaze entirely on the tip of her pencil. It is a quiet, breathtaking act of everyday heroism. She must sit there, a gentle soul, and act as a vessel for the last, heavy echoes of a dying regime. She absorbs the dark energy of the room and transforms it into neat, orderly loops of graphite. She builds a protective wall around her own heart, separating herself from the meaning of the words by focusing entirely on the mechanics of capturing them. When the dictation is finally finished, the silence returns to the room, but it is a heavier, sadder silence than before. The man turns and walks slowly away, disappearing into the shadows of his private quarters, leaving her alone with the notepad. She stands up, her chair making a soft, polite scrape against the floor. She gathers her pencils. She walks down the dim, empty corridor to her own small office. Now, the true work begins. She sits down in front of her typewriter. It is a heavy, beautiful machine, made of black metal and gleaming silver levers. It has been her constant companion through these long, terrifying months. She reaches into a drawer and pulls out a sheet of thick, high-quality paper, placing a delicate sheet of dark blue carbon paper behind it, and then another sheet of paper behind that. She taps the edges on the wooden desk to align them perfectly. It is a meticulous, comforting ritual. The smell of the carbon ink rises into the cool air, a sharp, familiar scent that grounds her in the present moment. She feeds the paper into the carriage, turning the rubber platen knob with a satisfying, rhythmic click. She adjusts the margins. She rests her fingertips on the cool, round keys. She takes a deep, grounding breath, and she begins to type. Clack. The sound is sharp and clean, cutting through the heavy hum of the bunker like a small, bright spark in the dark. Clack, 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 clack. In the dead of night, the solitary rhythm of the typewriter is the only proof of life in the quietest corners of the underground. It is a steady, hypnotic cadence. The metal type bars fly up, one by one, striking the ink ribbon and pressing the dark letters into the white paper with a soft, definitive snap. She types with incredible speed and precision. Her hands move over the keyboard like a pianist playing a complicated, somber sonata. The sound of the machine becomes her shield. As the bitter words from her notepad are transferred onto the official document, she refuses to let them touch her spirit. She dissociates entirely from the meaning of the sentences. She does not think about the war, or the falling city, or the terrifying finality of the testament she is creating. Instead, she focuses entirely on the spelling. She focuses on the perfect spacing between the words. She focuses on the satisfying, heavy pressure required to depress the shift key for a capital letter. She turns the terrible weight of history into a simple exercise of grammar and punctuation. When she reaches the end of a line, the typewriter gives a small, delicate ding. It is a bright, innocent sound, like a tiny silver bell ringing in a snow-covered forest. She pushes the silver return lever, sending the heavy carriage sliding back to the left with a smooth, metallic zip, and the roller clicks down to the next blank line. Ding. Zip. Clack, clack, clack. The rhythm wraps around her, a comforting, mechanical embrace. In the repetitive motion of her fingers, she finds a profound sense of control. The world outside is completely shattered. The city is burning, the earth is shaking, and the men in the conference rooms are lost in their maps and their despair. But here, in this tiny circle of light, sitting at her wooden desk, she is in absolute command. Every letter goes exactly where she tells it to go. Every margin is perfectly straight. She is maintaining order in a universe that has surrendered to chaos. As she types page after page, her mind slowly begins to drift away from the dark concrete walls. The rhythmic clatter of the keys transforms into the sound of a train, carrying her far away from Berlin. She closes her eyes for a brief second, letting her fingers find the keys by pure muscle memory. She imagines she is on a train heading south, toward the mountains. She imagines looking out the window and seeing endless fields of green grass, bathed in the soft, golden light of a summer evening. She can almost feel the warm breeze blowing through the open carriage, carrying the scent of pine needles and fresh rain. She thinks of her family. She wonders if they are looking at the same moon that she cannot see. She pours all her quiet longing, all her gentle resilience, into the pressure of her fingertips. Every keystroke is a heartbeat. Every typed page is a testament not to the man who spoke the words, but to the quiet, enduring strength of the woman who wrote them down. The night wears on. The stack of finished pages beside the typewriter grows thicker. The words are dark, heavy with the finality of a deeply broken mind, but on the paper, they look beautiful. They are perfectly aligned, crisp and clean. It is a striking, surreal contrast, the beautiful craftsmanship of the typist holding the ugly, tragic failures of the war. Finally, she reaches the end of her shorthand notes. She types the last few words. She strikes the key for the final period. The middle arm flies up, leaving a tiny, perfectly round dot of dark ink at the end of the sentence. It is finished. She reaches up and pulls the silver lever, rolling the paper out of the machine with a long, satisfying swoosh. She separates the crisp white pages from the dark blue carbon paper, setting the carbon aside. She taps the edges of the final document on the desk, making sure the stack is perfectly neat. The silence that rushes back into the room when the typewriter stops is profound. It rings in her ears. The comforting rhythm is gone, leaving her alone once more with the heavy, still air of the bunker. She looks down at the pages in her hands. She has captured history. She has done exactly what was asked of her, flawlessly and without complaint. She places the pages in a plain leather folder. She stands up, stretching her tired back, feeling the ache in her shoulders from sitting perfectly still for so many hours. She looks at the typewriter. The keys are quiet now, resting in their curved metal beds. She reaches out and gently covers the machine with its dark cloth hood, putting it to sleep for the rest of the night. She walks out of her office, carrying the folder. She moves like a quiet ghost through the pale corridors, delivering the document to the study where it will be signed, witnessed, and eventually lost to the ashes of the ruined city. Her duty is done. She returns to her small, narrow dormitory. She does not turn on the light. She takes off her shoes, moving with slow, exhausted, deliberate motions. She lies down on her simple cot, pulling the heavy woolen blanket up to her chin. The air is cool, carrying the faint, ever-present scent of wet cement. She closes her eyes. In the dark, the echoes of the bitter testament fade away entirely. They do not belong to her. She does not keep them in her heart. Instead, she listens to the deep, steady hum of the ventilation fans. She lets the sound wash over her, soothing her tired mind. She remembers the imaginary train. She remembers the green fields and the feeling of the sun on her face. And wrapped in the quiet grace of her own everyday heroism, having walked through the darkest shadows of the world and kept her gentle spirit intact, she finally drifts into a deep, unbroken sleep. In the heavy, breathless quiet of the underground, a bride gently smooths the dark silk of her dress, preparing to make a promise at the very edge of the world. The hands of the small, ticking clocks in the dim corridors have just slipped past midnight. It is the birth of a new day, though down here, buried beneath the trembling earth, the arrival of morning is an entirely invisible thing. The pale yellow light of the electric bulbs does not change. The deep, mechanical drone of the great ventilation fans does not alter its steady, hypnotic rhythm. Yet, a profound and surreal energy has begun to quietly stir within the gray concrete walls. It is a moment that feels entirely out of place, a fragile fragment of ordinary life dropped into the center of a collapsing universe. In a narrow, low-ceilinged room that serves as a private chamber, a woman stands before a small, silverback mirror. She is preparing for her wedding. In the bright, sunlit world she left behind so many weeks ago, a wedding is a symphony of light and color. It is the scent of blooming spring flowers, the ringing of bells from a high tower, the feeling of a warm breeze catching a white veil, and the joyful tears of a family gathered in love. But in this buried, windowless fortress, those things are only distant, fading dreams. Here, there are no flowers. There is only the faint, ever-present scent of wet cement, old paper, and the dust that occasionally drifts down from the ceiling when the distant artillery rumbles. She has chosen a dress of dark, elegant silk. It is a beautiful garment, but in the pale light of the bunker, the black fabric seems to absorb the shadows, wrapping her in a quiet, somber grace. She runs her hands down the sides of the skirt, feeling the smooth, cool slip of the material against her palms. It is a small, grounding sensation. Behind her, a young maid, one of the few who chose to remain in the shadows when the doors were opened, stands holding a delicate tortoiseshell comb. The maid steps forward, moving with an incredible, tender gentleness. She begins to brush the bride's hair. The rhythmic, repetitive motion of the comb sliding through the soft strands is a deeply soothing lullaby. The two women do not speak. They share a quiet, unspoken understanding of the profound strangeness of this night. In the mirror, their eyes meet for a brief second. The maid offers a soft, trembling smile, a tiny offering of warmth in the cold room. She adjusts a small clasp, securing a neat wave of hair, and softly pats the bride's shoulder. It is an act of simple, everyday kindness, anchoring the bride to her humanity before she steps out into the hall. Down the long, echoing corridor, a stranger has just arrived. He is a city magistrate, a man of ledgers and stamps, whose life was once defined by the quiet, orderly recording of births, marriages, and property deeds. Tonight, he has been summoned from his post in the burning city above, brought down the steep concrete stairs and into this subterranean labyrinth. He stands in the hallway, holding a worn leather briefcase to his chest like a protective shield. He brings the scent of the outside world with him, the sharp, bitter smell of wood smoke and the icy chill of the midnight air, trapped in the heavy wool of his coat. He blinks behind his spectacles, his eyes struggling to adjust to the artificial yellow glare. He looks around at the tired guards, the pale secretaries, and the heavy steel doors. He is profoundly ordinary, a simple man terrified by the falling sky, completely bewildered to find himself at the very center of the fading empire. A quiet orderly approaches him, offering a warm cup of tea to steady his visibly trembling hands. The magistrate takes it, whispering a breathless word of thanks, profoundly grateful for this tiny, unexpected comfort in a terrifying place. The venue for this midnight ceremony is the map room. Usually, this room is a theater of desperate illusions, filled with the haze of cigar smoke and the harsh whispers of exhausted men moving glass-headed pens across paper landscapes. But tonight, the large wooden table has been cleared. The maps of shrinking borders and lost forests have been swept away. In their place rests a single, blank sheet of official registry paper and a heavy, gold-nibbed fountain pen. The small group of witnesses begins to gather. They slip into the room like quiet ghosts, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. They are the closest aides, the secretaries, the weary inner circle. They wear their best remaining clothes, though their uniforms are slightly loose from weeks of meager rations, and their faces are deeply lined with an exhaustion that reaches all the way to the bone. They stand in a loose, quiet semicircle around the wooden table, holding their breath. The bride enters, walking softly beside the man whose shadow has defined all their lives. He looks older tonight, deeply stooped, his uniform hanging heavily on his shoulders. He moves with a slow, shuffling gait, a fragile figure illuminated by the pale electric light. They take their places before the magistrate. The room is incredibly still. The only sound is the low, eternal hum of the ventilator pushing filtered air through the iron grates. The magistrate opens his leather briefcase with a soft, metallic click. He takes out his documents. He clears his throat, the sound incredibly loud in the hushed acoustics of the concrete room. When he begins to speak, he keeps his voice low, adopting the bunker's natural, whispered tone. He reads the civil ceremony rites. It is a deeply bizarre, surreal recitation. In a world that is literally shaking apart, turning to ash just a few meters above their heads, the magistrate solemnly asks the bureaucratic questions required by the state. He asks if they are of pure descent. He asks if they are free of hereditary disease. The questions float into the dry air, absurd and meaningless in the face of the encroaching dark. Yet, the bride and groom nod. They play their parts in this tragic, formal theater. "I do," the bride whispers. Her voice is soft, a delicate vibration that barely reaches the witnesses standing just a few feet away. "I do," the groom replies, his voice a raspy, exhausted echo. Then comes the moment of the signature. It is the final, binding act, the tethering of two names in the dark. The magistrate turns the registry paper toward them and offers the heavy gold fountain pen. The groom takes it first, his hand shaking with a severe, uncontrollable tremor. He manages to scratch his name onto the page, the ink dark and heavy against the white paper. He sets the pen down. The bride steps forward. She picks up the warm pen, her fingers resting lightly on the smooth metal barrel. She leans over the table. The witnesses lean in slightly, watching the nib touch the paper. She begins to sign her name, out of pure, lifelong habit. She writes an E, a V, and a. Then, she writes a capital B, the first letter of her maiden name. She stops. The nib hovers just above the paper. In this tiny, suspended moment, a wave of profound, heartbreaking humanity fills the room. It is a mistake so ordinary, so deeply relatable, a bride accidentally signing her old name on her wedding day. For a fleeting second, the terrifying context of the bunker vanishes, and she is just a nervous woman holding a pen. She looks down at the ink. She takes a soft, quiet breath. With a delicate stroke, she draws a line through the letter B, crossing it out entirely. She moves her hand slightly to the right, and carefully, deliberately, writes her new, married surname. The scratch of the pen on the paper is the loudest sound in the world. It is the sound of a vow made in a void, a promise of union signed at the threshold of the end. The ceremony is over. The magistrate carefully blots the wet ink, his hand still shaking as he slides the document back into his leather briefcase. He gives a stiff, awkward bow, completely unsure of how to navigate the space between his ordinary life and this dark history. An aide gently guides him toward the door, leading him back to the long staircase, back up into the cold, burning night, carrying the final piece of paperwork this buried world will ever produce. Inside the map room, a quiet, surreal celebration begins. A cork is pulled from a bottle of champagne. It does not make a joyful, ringing pop. It makes a soft, muted sigh. The golden liquid is poured into delicate crystal flutes. The glasses are passed around the circle. The crystal feels heavy and cool in their hands. The guests step forward to offer their congratulations. They speak in hushed, velvet whispers, terrified of breaking the fragile illusion of the moment. "My best wishes," a secretary murmurs, forcing a gentle, trembling smile as she lightly touches the bride's arm. "May you be happy," an older officer whispers, bowing his head. They raise their glasses. The delicate clink of the crystal touching is a heartbreaking sound. It is a sound meant for sunlit terraces and bright futures. Here, in the windowless deep, it is a sound of profound sorrow. How do you wish a future to someone when you know, with absolute certainty, that tomorrow may never come? What does it mean to be a wife for a single, fading day? The bride smiles, thanking them in a voice as soft as falling dust. She sips the champagne. The bubbles rise in the pale light. For a few minutes, they all stand together, pretending. They pretend that they are safe. They pretend that the rumbles in the earth are just a passing storm. They lean into the bizarre intimacy of the moment, wrapping themselves in the comforting, familiar ritual of a toast, finding a fleeting, desperate warmth in the presence of one another. But the exhaustion of the bunker is a heavy, unavoidable tide. It pulls at their shoulders and weighs down their eyelids. The adrenaline of the ceremony quickly fades, leaving behind only the deep, aching fatigue of too many nights without sleep. The glasses are set down on the table, still half full. The quiet murmurs naturally softly fade into silence. The small congregation begins to disperse, drifting back out into the long, pale corridors like shadows returning to the dark. They exchange quiet, lingering nods as they part ways. They carry the memory of the black silk, the crossed-out letter, and the taste of the champagne back to their narrow cots. The bride and groom retreat to their private quarters, and the heavy wooden doors are pulled shut with a soft, final click. The map room is empty once more. The single, golden pen rests on the edge of the table. 2 empty crystal glasses sit beside it, catching the yellow light of the overhead bulbs. The bunker returns to its eternal, mechanical state. The ventilation fans hum their deep, unending lullaby. The pale corridors wait in the silence. The vows have been spoken, absorbed entirely by the thick concrete walls. They hang in the void, a strange, tragic echo of a normal life, a whisper of devotion floating softly in the dark as the exhausted inhabitants of the underground finally close their eyes, surrendering once again to the heavy, dreamless sleep of the deep. There is a stillness that falls over a room when the very last hope finally slips out the door, leaving only the quiet truth behind. Deep beneath the trembling earth, the atmosphere in the buried corridors has fundamentally changed. For weeks, the bunker had been a place of frenetic, desperate energy. There were hushed, hurried conversations in the hallways, the constant clatter of typewriters, and the urgent carrying of files and silver tea trays. But now, as the final days draw close, all of that restless movement has slowly ebbed away. The air feels impossibly thick, like a heavy woolen blanket draped over the shoulders of every person left standing in the pale yellow light. People move with a slow, waiting grace, their footsteps heavy, their eyes cast downward to the gray floorboards. The end is no longer a distant, frightening storm on the horizon. It is here, waiting patiently in the shadows. Yet, even in this suffocating twilight, there has been one small, beautiful tether to the natural world. She is a hound. A large, beautiful dog with a coat that feels like coarse silk, and eyes that hold a deep, soulful innocence. In a world built entirely of concrete, steel, and human fear, she has been a breathing reminder of life. She does not understand the maps in the conference room. She does not know why the earth above them occasionally trembles and shakes dust from the ceiling. She only knows the warmth of a gentle hand, the comforting scent of her handlers, and the simple, profound joy of companionship. For the exhausted men and women of the bunker, she has been an extraordinary comfort. When a young secretary felt the walls closing in, she would crouch down in the corridor, burying her face in the soft fur of the dog's neck, breathing in the earthy, familiar scent of a creature that belonged under the open sky. The dog would lean into the embrace, her tail making a soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump against the concrete floor. In those brief, stolen moments, the terrible reality of the war faded away. The dog offered a pure, uncomplicated love that asked for nothing in return, and in a place stripped of its humanity, that love was a priceless treasure. But as the heavy realization of the end settles over the bunker, a deeply somber decision is made. The world above is a fractured, violent ruin. The sanctuary below is about to close its doors forever. And the innocence of the hound must be protected from the collapsing dark. We find the handler in a quiet, dimly lit room, away from the main thoroughfares of the bunker. He is a man who has cared for this animal with a quiet, profound devotion. He has fed her, brushed her coat until it shone, and spoken to her in low, gentle whispers when the artillery rumbles frightened her. Now, he sits on a low wooden stool, holding a soft bristle brush in his hand. The dog rests her heavy head on his knee, looking up at him with absolute, unwavering trust. He begins to brush her. He moves his hand with an excruciating slowness, drawing the bristles down the long curve of her back. With every stroke, his heart breaks a little more. He is performing an act of everyday heroism, carrying the terrible weight of this farewell so that she does not have to feel any fear. The silence in the room is vast and heavy, broken only by the soft, rhythmic sound of the brush moving through fur, and the deep, steady breathing of the dog. He looks at her ears, relaxed and soft. He looks at her paws, which used to run so joyfully through the green grass of the Chancellery garden, back when the sun still shone on their faces. He remembers the way she would chase the falling autumn leaves, leaping into the air with a boundless, joyful energy. He leans down, pressing his forehead against hers. He closes his eyes. He speaks to her, his voice a trembling, barely audible whisper. He does not use words of command or duty. He uses words of comfort. He tells her what a good and faithful friend she has been. He tells her about a vast, beautiful meadow, far away from the noise and the dust, where the grass is always cool and the sky is always blue. He paints a picture of peace for her, pouring all of his love into the gentle cadence of his voice. She sighs, a long, contented exhalation, entirely at ease in his presence. There is a small, glass vial resting on a table nearby. It holds a profound and tragic mercy. It is the undeniable proof that the long waiting is over. The handler knows what he must do. It is an act of supreme, agonizing love to spare an innocent creature from the suffering of a falling world. He sets the brush down on the floor. His hands are shaking, but his touch remains infinitely gentle. He strokes the soft fur beneath her chin. He looks deeply into her eyes, making a silent, sacred promise that she will never know pain, that she will only know sleep. The moment passes with an absolute, breathtaking quietness. There is no struggle. There is no fear. There is only the gentle easing of a soul passing from the harsh, electric light of the bunker into a deep, unending dream. The dog lowers her head, resting it softly on her paws. Her eyes flutter closed, as if she is simply settling down for a long afternoon nap in the sun. The gentle rise and fall of her chest slows down, taking one last, peaceful breath, and then, she is perfectly still. The silence that fills the room after her final breath is the loudest, heaviest sound the handler has ever known. It is a profound emptiness. The heartbeat that had anchored him to the living world has stopped. He does not stand up. He does not leave the room. He slips from the wooden stool onto the cold floor, gathering her heavy, still form into his arms. He buries his face in her warm fur, and in the protective shadow of the dim room, he finally allows himself to weep. His tears are silent, born of a deep, exhausting sorrow. He weeps for the beautiful, innocent creature resting in his arms. He weeps for the gentle memories of the world they have both lost. And he weeps because he knows that the quiet sleep he just gave to her is the very same sleep that is waiting for them all. News of the hound travels through the bunker not through announcements, but through a shared, unspoken knowing. It ripples down the pale corridors like a cold draft. The secretaries, the guards, the aides, they notice the absence. They notice that the soft patting of paws on the floorboards is gone. They notice that there is no gentle panting, no warm presence brushing past their legs in the narrow hallways. When they realize what has happened, a collective, silent grief washes over the subterranean world. People pause at their desks, resting their hands on the cold metal of their typewriters, staring blankly at the gray walls. An older officer leans against a concrete pillar, slowly taking off his cap, bowing his head in the dim light. The loss of the dog is a devastating psychological threshold. As long as she was there, a tiny fragment of normal, beautiful life remained. She was a symbol of hope, a creature that belonged to the sun and the rain. With her gone, the bunker is entirely severed from the earth above. It is now truly a tomb. The men and women retreat to their small, cramped quarters. They sit on the edges of their narrow cots, surrounded by the shadows. The reality of their situation is no longer a concept to be discussed or planned for, it is a physical weight sitting on their chests. The testing of the vial was not just for the dog. It was a stark, terrifying rehearsal for their own imminent end. The brave, forced smiles that they have worn for weeks completely dissolve. The polite, hushed conversations cease. There is nothing left to say. They lie back on their thin mattresses, pulling the heavy, scratchy woolen blankets over their shoulders. They listen to the deep, mechanical drone of the ventilation fans. The sound is no longer a comforting lullaby, it is the ticking of a massive, indifferent clock, counting down the final hours. In the quietest corner of the bunker, the handler remains sitting on the floor, holding his gentle friend. The pale yellow light casts long, mournful shadows across the room. He traces the soft line of her ear with his thumb. He finds a strange, fragile peace in the knowledge that she is finally safe. She will never hear the heavy thud of the artillery again. She will never have to tremble at the falling dust. He closes his tired eyes, letting the heavy silence wrap around him. In his mind, he opens a door. He watches the hound step through it, bounding joyfully out of the gray concrete and into a brilliant, sunlit field of tall, green grass. He watches her run, free and light, chasing the wind into the horizon. He holds onto that beautiful, quiet dream, guarding it like a precious flame in his heart, as he and the rest of the buried world wait in the gathering dark for the final, inevitable closing of the door. There is a profound and heavy grace in the simple breaking of bread when you know it is the very last time you will ever taste the harvest. In the deepest hollows of the subterranean world, the air has grown incredibly still. The frantic, nervous energy of the past few weeks has entirely evaporated, leaving behind a thick, breathless quiet that settles over the concrete corridors like a heavy velvet drape. The great iron ventilation fans continue their low, mechanical humming, but the sound feels different now. It is no longer a lullaby, it is the slow, steady ticking of a clock that has almost run out of winding. It is the final afternoon. Yet, even at the very edge of the world, the human body makes its gentle, persistent demands. It is a strange, surreal realization that even when the sky is falling and history is closing its final page, the stomach still empties, and the heart still asks for the simple comfort of sustenance. Hunger, in these final hours, feels almost like an apology from the body, a quiet reminder that you are still alive, still breathing, still tethered to the physical earth for just a little while longer. In the small, cramped pantry that serves as the bunker's kitchen, a woman stands before a modest electric stove. She is the cook, a woman whose hands have spent a lifetime turning flour, water, and heat into love. Today, she moves with an excruciating, tender slowness. She is preparing a simple lunch. There are no grand roasts, no delicate pastries, no rich sauces. The world outside is a fractured ruin, and the pantry shelves reflect that barrenness. There is only a small pot of clear, salty broth, a few boiled potatoes, and a loaf of dense, dark bread. But watch the way she prepares it. She approaches this meager meal with a quiet, breathtaking reverence. She peels the potatoes with a small knife, letting the thin skins fall into a metal bucket. She watches the water boil, the pale white steam rising into the cold, artificial light of the room, carrying with it the warm, earthy scent of starch and salt. She wipes her hands on her coarse cotton apron, smoothing the fabric down over her skirt. This is her everyday heroism. In a universe entirely consumed by destruction and despair, she is choosing to nourish. She is choosing to provide a warm, safe thing for the people she cares for. She stirs the broth, pouring all of her unspoken grief, her maternal tenderness, and her quiet resilience into the gentle, circular motion of the wooden spoon. Out in the small dining area, the table has been set. The white linen cloth is slightly wrinkled, but it is clean. The delicate porcelain plates, painted with fading vines and pale roses, are arranged in perfectly neat, orderly spaces. Silver forks and spoons rest quietly beside them, catching the pale yellow glow of the caged electric bulbs. Slowly, the inhabitants of the bunker begin to gather. They emerge from the dim hallways, moving like shadows walking underwater. There are the young secretaries, their eyes rimmed with red, though their tears have long since dried up. There are the older aides, their gray uniforms hanging loosely on their exhausted frames. They do not speak as they enter the room. The silence is too heavy, too sacred to be broken by casual words. They simply pull back the heavy wooden chairs and take their seats. The cook brings the food out in simple, metal pots. She spoons the hot, clear broth into the shallow porcelain bowls. She places a single, warm potato on each plate. Finally, she sets a wooden board in the center of the table, holding the loaf of dark bread, already sliced into thick, generous pieces. She steps back, standing near the doorway, folding her hands quietly in front of her. The meal begins. In the crushing quiet of the room, the sounds of eating are magnified, echoing softly against the concrete walls. It is a beautiful, deeply human symphony. You can hear the gentle, metallic clink of a silver spoon tapping against the edge of a porcelain bowl. You can hear the soft scraping of a fork gathering the soft flesh of a potato. These are the sounds of ordinary life, the sounds of a Sunday afternoon in a sunlit kitchen, transplanted into the heart of a buried tomb. A young woman reaches out and takes a slice of the dark bread. Her fingers tremble slightly as she feels the rough, hearty crust. She brings it to her lips and takes a small bite. She chews slowly, methodically. The bread is dense, tasting of rye and salt and the deep, rich earth. As she tastes it, a profound wave of melancholy washes over her. She realizes, with a sudden, aching clarity, that she will never taste bread again. She will never feel the warmth of an oven, or the soft crumble of a crust falling onto her lap. She focuses entirely on the physical sensation in her mouth, trying to memorize the texture, the flavor, the simple, miraculous reality of the food. But swallowing is a terrible effort. The throats of the men and women at the table are tight, constricted by a massive, unspoken sorrow. The food feels heavy on their tongues. They eat not out of hunger, but out of a desperate, lingering duty to the routine of being alive. They sip the hot broth, letting the warm liquid slide down, soothing the cold ache in their chests. They eat with their eyes cast downward, staring intently at the painted roses on their plates, terrified that if they look up, the delicate, fragile composure they are all maintaining will instantly shatter. Yet, eventually, someone does look up. An older officer, his face deeply lined with the exhaustion of 1,000 sleepless nights, lifts his gaze from his bowl. He looks across the narrow table at a young secretary sitting opposite him. She is staring at her untouched potato, her hands resting motionless in her lap. He does not say her name. He simply reaches out, his withered hand moving slowly across the white tablecloth, and gently nudges the wooden breadboard a few inches toward her. She slowly lifts her eyes, meeting his. In that single, quiet glance, an entire lifetime of words is exchanged without a single syllable vibrating in the air. His eyes are soft, filled with a deep, paternal sorrow. They say, "I know. I know how heavy it is. But please eat. Please, take this one last comfort." Her eyes, wide and swimming with unshed tears, softly reply, "I am so frightened. But I am grateful you are here." She gives a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She reaches out and takes a piece of the bread. The officer lowers his eyes back to his plate, taking a slow sip of his broth. This is the true language of the final meal. It is a conversation composed entirely of whispers and micro-gestures. It is the polite murmured thank you when a glass of water is poured. It is the brief, lingering touch of fingertips when passing the salt cellar. Every small interaction is saturated with the heavy, golden light of finality. They are saying goodbye. They are saying goodbye to the food, to the table, to the pale yellow light, and, most profoundly, to one another. They do not speak of the war. They do not speak of the artillery shells that occasionally send deep, muffled thuds rolling through the ceiling above them, shaking fine gray dust onto the pristine tablecloth. They ignore the tremors, simply placing their hands gently over their cups to protect their water. They refuse to let the violence of the world interrupt this quiet communion. Instead, they sit in the stifling, heavy quietness, wrapping themselves in the shared intimacy of the meal. They are a congregation of ghosts, sharing a final sacrament before fading into the shadows. The simplicity of the food, the humble potato, the clear broth, the dark bread, strips away all the grandeur and illusion that brought them to this dark place. In this room, there are no ranks, no titles, and no empires. There are only tired, frightened human beings, sitting together in the dark, finding a desperate, beautiful solace in the act of sharing a loaf of bread. As the imaginary afternoon presses on, the bowls are slowly emptied. The breadboard is cleared of all but a few scattered crumbs. The metallic scraping of the forks finally ceases. The meal is over. But no one stands up. No one makes a move to push their heavy wooden chair back from the table. They sit there, their hands resting on the white linen, suspended in the stillness. To stand up is to acknowledge that the meal has ended. To leave the table is to walk out of the pantry and into the corridor, where the final, terrifying reality of the afternoon is waiting for them. So they linger. They listen to the deep, mechanical breathing of the bunker. They listen to the quiet, synchronized breathing of the people sitting beside them. A young woman closes her eyes, committing the smell of the room to her deepest memory. She remembers the warm scent of the broth, the sharp tang of the rye, the faint, metallic scent of the silverware. Finally, the cook steps forward from the doorway. She moves with the same gentle, practiced grace, reaching out to collect the empty porcelain bowls. The soft clinking of the dishes being stacked is a definitive, heartbreaking sound. It is the sound of the curtain falling. One by one, the inhabitants of the bunker place their cloth napkins on the table. They push their chairs back, the wood scraping softly against the floorboards. They stand up. They do not look at each other now. The unspoken goodbyes have been said, sealed in the quiet glances and the shared taste of the salt. They turn and walk slowly out the door, stepping back into the pale, unending twilight of the long corridors. They return to their narrow cots, to their small desks, to their quiet corners to wait. Behind them, in the empty dining room, the cook stands alone at the sink. She turns on the tap, the water running cold and clear over the delicate, painted plates. She washes the silver forks. She wipes down the wooden breadboard, brushing the final crumbs into the palm of her hand. She performs these tasks with immense, loving care, finding a quiet, profound peace in the gentle rhythm of cleaning up. The bread has been broken. The whispers have faded into the thick, concrete walls. The stifling, heavy quietness reclaims the room entirely, wrapping around the empty table, as the bunker and everyone inside it slowly, inevitably, surrenders to the silence of the deep. There is a specific, suffocating weight to a single second of time that simply refuses to pass. Outside the heavy wooden doors of the private study, the pale, windowless corridor has become a place suspended entirely outside of reality. Here, deep beneath the earth, the normal flow of the universe has ceased to exist. Time is no longer a gentle river that carries you softly from morning into evening. In this narrow hallway, time has frozen into a vast, unmoving ocean, and the men and women standing in the dim, yellow light are trapped perfectly still within its depths. The air is heavy. It presses against their shoulders and settles into their lungs with a profound, dusty stillness. The great iron lungs of the bunker's ventilation system continue to spin, sending their deep, mechanical drone vibrating through the concrete floorboards, but even that familiar lullaby seems to have slowed its rhythm. The inhabitants of the bunker have gathered in the shadows of the corridor. They do not stand in a neat, orderly line. They are scattered along the walls, leaning against the cold, damp stone, holding their breath. They are waiting. To wait in this corridor is to endure an agonizing, quiet kind of torture. It is the absolute helplessness of standing on the shoreline, watching a great ship slowly sink beneath the waves, knowing there is not a single thing you can do to stop the water. Look closely at the people standing in the pale light. A young secretary leans against a concrete pillar, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles are entirely white. She is staring at the intricate grain of the wood on the study door. She traces the dark lines of the timber with her eyes, over and over again, trying to force her mind to focus on the simple, natural pattern of a tree that grew under a blue sky so many years ago. She is trying to escape the hallway. If she focuses hard enough on the wood, perhaps she will not have to hear the silence. She takes a slow, trembling breath. The sound of her inhaling is incredibly loud in the hushed acoustics of the underground. It is a fragile, frightened sound. Next to her, an older aide stands perfectly straight. He is a man who has spent his entire life adhering to schedules, to the precise, comforting order of military time. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, silver pocket watch. He clicks the cover open. The tiny, metallic sound rings down the hallway like a dropped pin. He stares down at the circular face of the watch. The glass is slightly smudged. The delicate black hands are moving, but to his tired eyes, they appear completely stuck. He watches the thin second hand making its sweeping, stuttering journey around the dial. Tick. 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 Every single tick of the watch feels like lifting a heavy stone. He watches a minute pass. It feels like an entire season has come and gone above their heads. He watches another minute pass. The watch feels incredibly heavy in his palm, as if it contains the entire weight of the crumbling empire within its tiny, brass gears. He closes the silver cover with a soft snap and slides it back into his pocket, unable to bear the visual proof of how slowly their lives are moving. Because they cannot speak, they listen. The corridor is filled with the deeply intimate, fragile sounds of human beings simply trying to exist under unbearable pressure. It is the sound of a dry throat swallowing. It is the faint, papery rustle of a woolen sleeve as someone shifts their weight from one tired foot to the other. It is the quiet, rhythmic tapping of a leather shoe against the floorboards, a nervous energy finding the only escape it can. Above all, it is the sound of collective breathing. When you are trapped in a sealed concrete box, the breath of the person standing next to you becomes the rhythm of your own survival. They are breathing together, a quiet, desperate choir of air. In, hold, out. In, hold, out. They are sharing the stale, filtered oxygen, anchored to one another by the simple, profound fact that their chests are still rising and falling in the dark. As the minutes stretch into an eternity, the mind begins to rebel against the waiting. It is a protective measure, a gentle mercy of the human brain. The people in the hallway begin to retreat inward, wrapping themselves in the softest, safest memories they can find. A young guard, standing near the doorway, closes his eyes. He lets his chin drop toward his chest. He is no longer standing in the Führerbunker. In his mind, he is a small boy again, hiding in the tall, sweet-smelling grass of his grandfather's farm. He is playing hide-and-seek with his brother. He remembers the feeling of his heart pounding in his chest, the thrilling, joyful anticipation of being discovered. He remembers the smell of the warm earth, the feeling of the summer sun beating down on his shoulders, the sound of the wind moving through the wheat. He holds onto that memory with a desperate, crushing grip. He tries to pull the warmth of that summer sun down through the meters of dirt and concrete, trying to wrap it around his shivering soul. He tells himself that this hallway is just another hiding place. He tells himself that eventually, someone will call his name, the game will be over, and they can all go home for supper. But the fantasy cannot hold. The damp chill of the wall seeps through his uniform. The smell of wet cement and fear drags him back into the pale yellow light. He opens his eyes, blinking away the phantom brightness of the sun, and returns to the agonizing crawl of the clock. A sudden wave of exhaustion washes over the young secretary. Her knees tremble, threatening to buckle beneath her. She sways, just a fraction of an inch, her shoulders slipping against the concrete pillar. Instantly, the older aide steps closer to her. He does not say a word. To speak would be to shatter the fragile glass of the hallway. Instead, he reaches out and gently places his hand beneath her elbow. His grip is firm, warm, and profoundly steadying. It is an act of quiet, everyday heroism. In a space where everyone is drowning in their own terror, he offers her a piece of driftwood. She looks up at him, her eyes wide and shining with unshed tears. She gives a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of gratitude. He nods back, a slow, gentle lowering of his chin. He keeps his hand on her arm, sharing his strength, tethering her to the ground so she does not float away into the panic. They stand side by side, two ordinary people caught in the gravitational pull of a collapsing star, holding onto each other in the dark. The waiting presses down on them until the air itself feels solid. The tension is a physical ache in their jaws, in their shoulders, behind their eyes. They are entirely focused on the heavy wooden doors. They are waiting for the final period at the end of a long, tragic sentence. And then, it happens. It is not a loud noise. It does not shatter the air or echo violently down the pale corridors. The thick concrete walls and the heavy, padded doors of the study swallow almost all of the force, turning what should have been a deafening crack into something incredibly small. It is a single, muffled sound. A dull, heavy thud, like a thick book falling from a desk and hitting a carpeted floor in another room. It is a sound so remarkably ordinary, so brief and unremarkable, that if you were not listening for it with your entire soul, you might not have heard it at all. But in the breathless quiet of the hallway, it is the loudest sound in the history of the world. The immediate aftermath of the sound is an absolute, terrifying paralysis. No one moves. No one breathes. The young secretary freezes, her eyes widening. The older aide's hand tightens imperceptibly on her elbow. The young guard stops remembering the summer sun. For one long, suspended heartbeat, the universe simply stops turning. The string has been cut. The heavy weight that has been hanging over all of their heads for so many months has finally, irrevocably dropped. Then comes the silence. It is not the same silence that filled the hallway just a moment before. The silence of the waiting was tense, electric, and vibrating with anticipation. This new silence is entirely different. It is vast. It is hollow. It is the heavy, ringing silence of a sudden, absolute emptiness. It is the quiet of a house after the last guest has walked out the door and the lock has clicked shut. The mechanical hum of the ventilator seems to rush in to fill the void, sounding suddenly louder, harsher in their ears. The air in the corridor feels instantly colder, as if the central fire of the bunker has been abruptly blown out. A profound, complicated wave of emotion washes over the people standing in the hall. There is terror, yes, because the inevitable has finally arrived, and the fragile umbrella that shielded them from the ruined world above is gone. But woven deeply into that terror is a quiet, secret, overwhelming relief. The agonizing wait is over. The darkest corner has been turned. The burden has shifted from anticipating the end to simply living in the aftermath. The young secretary closes her eyes. A single tear, hot and heavy, finally breaks free and tracks slowly down her pale cheek. She does not wipe it away. She lets it fall, a tiny, silent mourning for the loss of a life, for the loss of her youth, and for the thousands of days that led them all to this dark, buried hallway. The older aide slowly releases his grip on her arm. He lets his hand fall to his side. He takes a deep, slow breath, letting the stale air fill his lungs entirely before releasing it in a long, quiet sigh. He reaches into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the silver casing of his watch, but he does not take it out. He does not need to look at the time anymore. The hour has finished its terrible work. The heavy wooden doors of the study remain closed. The corridor is perfectly still. The people standing in the pale light do not immediately rush forward. They linger in the quiet, wrapping themselves in the profound gravity of the moment. They have stood in the shadows and witnessed the quiet closing of an era. Now, the weight of the clock has lifted, only to be replaced by the weight of the world they must soon return to. But for this one, singular minute, they do nothing. They simply stand together in the heavy, terrifying silence of the deep, listening to the gentle sound of one another breathing, finding a desperate, beautiful solace in the simple, undeniable fact that they are still here. To carry the weight of an ending is to feel the earth pulling you down, demanding that all things eventually return to the dust. In the immediate, breathless aftermath of the single muffled sound, the heavy wooden doors of the study are finally opened. The stillness inside is absolute. It is a quiet so profound that it seems to swallow the very air in the room. But there is no time to linger in the shock, no time to sit with the heavy, paralyzing grief of the moment. A final, deeply solemn duty remains. It is a task that requires a small group of exhausted, hollow-eyed men to gather their remaining strength, to wrap the tragedy of their collapsing world in rough, dark blankets, and to carry it up into the light. They step forward, their movements incredibly slow and deliberate. They do not speak. The words they might have used to command armies or direct the fate of nations have completely abandoned them. They are no longer officers or aides, they are simply pallbearers in a tomb that is rapidly running out of air. They lift the heavy, blanketed burdens. The physical weight is immense, but the psychological weight is entirely crushing. It presses down on their shoulders, bowing their backs. They grip the rough woolen fabric, their knuckles turning white, and begin the slow, agonizing journey toward the emergency exit. The path leads away from the pale, familiar yellow light of the main corridors and into a narrower, steeper stairwell. These are the stairs that lead up to the Chancellery Garden. With every step they take, their leather boots scrape softly against the chipped concrete. It is a rhythmic, laborious sound. Scrape. Step. Breathe. Scrape. Step. Breathe. The men lean into the incline, their faces pale and slick with the cold sweat of exertion and profound sorrow. As they climb higher, a remarkable, sensory shift begins to occur. For months, their lungs have known only the warm, stale, heavily filtered air of the subterranean world. They have lived in a space smelling faintly of damp paper, old uniforms, and machine oil. But now, as they approach the heavy iron door at the top of the stairs, the air pressure begins to change. A cold, sharp draft slips through the cracks in the metal casing. It brushes against their faces, carrying a scent they have almost forgotten. It is the smell of the broken earth. It smells of pulverized brick, of charred wood, of winter giving way to a violent, ruined spring. To breathe it in is a physical shock. A young orderly, struggling under the weight of his corner of the burden, closes his eyes for a brief second and simply lets the cold air fill his lungs. It stings his throat. It is harsh and bitter, yet it is undeniably real. It is the breath of the outside world, reaching down to pull them up. A hand reaches out and grasps the heavy iron latch of the door. With a great, groaning effort, the metal hinges complain, and the door is pushed open. They step over the threshold, emerging from the dark, suffocating cocoon of the bunker and out into the open air. The shock of the sky is almost too much to bear. It is not a beautiful, sunlit canopy. It is a vast, bruised expanse of pale gray clouds, hanging low and heavy over the ruined city. The light is flat and entirely devoid of warmth, casting no shadows on the ground. Yet, it is the sky. It is infinite and open, a staggering contrast to the low, oppressive concrete ceilings they have lived beneath for so many days. The men pause for a moment, simply staring upward. The wind, howling through the jagged teeth of the shattered buildings around them, rushes over their faces. It is a wild, untamed wind. It tugs at the lapels of their heavy coats and rustles the dark wool of the blankets they carry. It feels like a rough, cleansing hand wiping the artificial dust of the bunker from their skin. They stand there, blinking against the sudden brightness of the gray day, feeling profoundly small beneath the indifferent canopy of the heavens. They look out across the Chancellery Garden. In their memories, this was a place of immaculate beauty. They remember the perfectly manicured lawns, the tall, ancient trees casting cool, dappled shade on a summer afternoon. They remember the smell of blooming roses and the sound of birds singing in the high branches. But the garden they are standing in now is a lunar landscape. The earth has been violently torn open. Great, jagged craters pit the ground, exposing the dark, damp soil beneath the grass. The ancient trees have been stripped of their branches, their trunks splintered and blackened, reaching up toward the gray clouds like skeletal fingers. Everywhere there is the pale, chalky dust of shattered stone, covering the ground like a terrible, dirty snow. The beauty of the past has been entirely erased, replaced by the stark, undeniable reality of the present. The small group begins to move forward, navigating the treacherous, uneven ground. They step carefully over broken masonry and twisted pieces of metal, their boots sinking softly into the loose, churned earth. The wind continues to howl around them, a mournful, sweeping sound that drowns out the distant, rhythmic thudding of the artillery. They reach a shallow depression in the ruined earth, a crater formed by a falling shell just days before. It is here, in this broken hollow, that they stop. With an agonizing gentleness, they lower the heavy, blanketed burdens to the ground. They are so exhausted that their hands tremble violently as they let go of the fabric. They step back, their chests heaving, their breath rising in small, white plumes in the cold air. They stand in a loose circle around the crater, looking down. There is no ceremony here. There are no flags, no sweeping music, no final, soaring speeches. The grand illusions of power and destiny that defined their lives for so many years have been stripped away entirely, leaving only this quiet, desolate chore in a dusty garden. A heavy metal canister is brought forward. The sharp, chemical scent of petrol cuts through the smell of the damp earth. A man tips the canister, pouring the liquid into the crater. It splashes softly against the dark wool. The sound of the pouring liquid is terribly ordinary, a mundane noise echoing in a landscape of unimaginable tragedy. The canister is set aside. The men step back a few more paces. One of the older age reaches into the pocket of his coat. His fingers search blindly for a moment, finally finding what he is looking for. He pulls out a small, simple box of matches. He takes one out. His hands are shaking so badly that he struggles to strike it. He strikes it once against the rough side of the box, but nothing happens. He takes a slow, deep breath, trying to steady his trembling fingers. He strikes it again. A tiny, fragile spark flares into life. It is a minuscule point of warmth in the vast, freezing gray of the garden. He cups his hand around the small flame, protecting it from the howling wind. He steps forward to the edge of the crater. He looks down one last time, his eyes heavy with a profound, unnameable sorrow, and he tosses the match into the depression. There is a sudden, rushing whoosh of air, and the fire catches. The flames erupt violently, a sudden burst of brilliant, searing orange against the dull, washed-out colors of the ruined world. The fire leaps upward, wild and hungry, dancing frantically in the wind. The heat is immediate and intense. It pushes against the faces of the men standing in the circle, a sudden, shocking wave of warmth that forces them to take another step back. They stand and watch. The fire crackles and hisses, consuming the fabric, consuming the history, consuming the very center of the universe they once knew. There is a strange, hypnotic comfort in watching a fire burn. The dancing flames command their entire attention, pulling their minds away from the terror of the past and the uncertainty of the future. For these few, quiet minutes, they are just men standing around a fire in the cold. The warmth seeps into their numb hands and their frozen faces. It is a destructive fire, yes, but it is also a source of heat in a deeply cold world. From the heart of the bright orange flames, a thick column of dark, heavy smoke begins to rise. It billows upward, twisting and turning as the wind catches it. It rises above the shattered trees, above the ruined walls of the chancellery, climbing higher and higher into the pale gray sky. The men watch it go. They follow the path of the smoke with their tired eyes. It is a profoundly poetic, deeply tragic sight. All the grand architecture, all the endless maps, all the whispered terrors in the dark corridors below, everything is being reduced to this single, rising column of soot. The smoke drifts upward, thinning out as it reaches the clouds, until it simply blends into the vast, indifferent gray of the sky. It vanishes, leaving no trace, as if it had never existed at all. An empire built on a 1,000-year promise, dissolving quietly into the wind. The men remain by the fire for a long time. They do not want to leave the warmth. They do not want to return to the cold, suffocating dark of the bunker. But the artillery is still pounding in the distance, a constant, rolling thunder that shakes the ground beneath their feet. The city is still falling. The world has not stopped turning just because their part in it has ended. Slowly, the flames begin to die down. The bright orange fades to a dull, glowing red. The heat recedes, and the biting chill of the wind returns, slicing through their heavy coats. An officer gives a small, quiet nod. It is time. They turn away from the crater. They do not look back. They retrace their steps through the shattered masonry and the chalky dust, walking with their heads bowed against the wind. They reach the heavy iron door leading back down into the earth. One by one, they step over the threshold, leaving the pale sky and the howling wind behind. They begin the long descent down the concrete stairs. The air grows warmer, staler, and heavier with every step. The yellow light of the artificial bulbs replaces the gray daylight. When the last man is inside, he reaches out and pulls the heavy iron door shut. The metal latch clicks into place with a deep, resonant finality. The sound of the wind is instantly cut off. They return to the dim corridors. The bunker is waiting for them, vast and empty and incredibly still. The deep, mechanical drone of the ventilation fans wraps around them once more. They walk back to their small rooms, their hands smelling faintly of smoke and petrol, carrying the quiet realization that the darkest hour has finally passed. They sit on the edges of their narrow cots, staring at the gray walls, resting their tired minds in the silent aftermath, while high above them, the last wisps of dark smoke continue to drift aimlessly into the beautiful, bleak, and unnoticing sky. There is a silence so profound it does not just fill a room, it slowly breaks the heart of anyone who stands within it. Deep within the subterranean labyrinth, far away from the heavy wooden doors of the study and the lingering smell of smoke in the stairwells, there is a small, quiet sanctuary. It is a room that was never meant to exist in a fortress of war. Here, the pale, artificial light of the bunker is softened, dimmed to a gentle, golden twilight. The harsh, damp concrete walls are partially hidden by the simple, innocent clutter of childhood. A wooden toy horse rests quietly in a corner. A small, knitted doll lies abandoned on a chair. Small pairs of leather shoes are lined up perfectly straight against the baseboard, waiting for a morning walk that will never come. In this room, the air is not filled with the tense, terrified breathing of exhausted adults. It is filled with the soft, rhythmic, perfect sighs of sleeping children. They lie in simple, narrow beds, their small bodies tucked beneath heavy woolen blankets. They are entirely oblivious to the collapsing empire above them. They do not hear the distant, muffled thud of the artillery, or if they do, their dreaming minds have turned the terrifying noise into the sound of distant thunder on a warm summer evening. Their faces are smooth, relaxed, and impossibly beautiful in the dim light. A young boy sleeps with his hands curled into loose fists near his chin. His older sister lies in the bed beside him, her long, carefully brushed hair fanning out across the white pillow like a halo of spun silk. This room is the very last beating heart of the bunker. It is the only place where innocence has survived the crushing weight of the earth. But the world outside is dark, and the shadows are finally creeping beneath the door. The door opens with a faint, soft click. A woman steps into the room. She moves like a ghost, her footsteps entirely silent on the floorboards. She is a mother, a woman who has spent her life meticulously organizing the world around her, keeping her children perfectly dressed, perfectly behaved, and perfectly safe. But the world she knew has shattered into a million unfixable pieces. To look into her eyes now is to look into a vast, terrifying abyss of maternal despair. She stands in the center of the room, surrounded by the soft breathing of her children. The low, eternal hum of the bunker's ventilation fans wraps around her, a mechanical lullaby that has watched over them all for so many weeks. She looks at the small, sleeping faces. In her mind, a dark and tragic logic has taken root. It is a logic born of absolute terror and a deeply warped, desperate kind of love. She believes that the world above the concrete ceiling is no longer a place for children. She imagines the fires, the ruins, the violence, and the terrifying chaos of the advancing armies. She looks at her daughters and her sons, so pure and untouched, and she makes an unthinkable, heartbreaking decision. She decides that she will not let the cruel, broken world have them. She will fold them away in the dark, preserving their innocence forever in a quiet, unbroken sleep. It is a terrible, breathtakingly sorrowful moment. It is the dark fairy tale made real, the mother who leads her children into the deepest part of the forest to hide them from the wolves, only to realize there is no way back home. She moves toward the first bed. Her movements are agonizingly slow, imbued with an immense, trembling delicacy. She sits on the edge of the mattress. The mattress sinks slightly beneath her weight, but the child does not stir. She reaches out her hand. Her fingers are cold, but her touch is infinitely gentle. She brushes a stray lock of hair away from her daughter's forehead. The girl's skin is warm and soft, radiating the simple, beautiful heat of life. The mother leans down, her face just inches from the sleeping child. She whispers a name, her voice a soft, velvet breath in the quiet room. It is a voice filled with a lifetime of lullabies, of scraped knees kissed better, of stories read by firelight. She holds a small, fragile glass in her hand. It contains a bitter drop, a medicine she whispers will help them sleep through the loud storm outside. She must wake them, but only just enough. She traces the line of her child's cheek. The girl stirs, her eyelids fluttering open. In the dim, pale light, her eyes are heavy, clouded with the deep, sweet fog of sleep. She looks up at her mother. There is no fear in her gaze, only absolute, unwavering trust. Why should she be afraid? It is her mother. It is the woman who has always kept her safe. Just a little medicine, my darling, the mother whispers, her voice remarkably steady, though her soul is fracturing into dust. To help you rest. The storm is very loud tonight. The child nods sleepily. She parts her lips, accepting the bitter drop without question. She swallows, her face scrunching in a brief, tiny grimace at the taste, before her mother gently offers a small sip of sweet water to wash it away. Sleep now, the mother murmurs, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss against the girl's forehead. Close your eyes. Dream of the sun. The child obeys. Her heavy eyelids flutter and close. She sighs, a long, quiet exhalation that rustles the edge of the woolen blanket. She turns her head slightly into the pillow, sinking back down into the deep, dark water of sleep. The mother does not move for a long time. She sits on the edge of the bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her daughter's chest. She watches as the rhythm begins to slow. She watches the terrible, irreversible quiet begin to take hold. She sits there, holding the immense, suffocating weight of what she has just done, bearing the tragedy entirely alone in the dim light. And then, with a slow, agonizing grace, she stands up. She moves to the next bed. And then the next. The ritual is repeated in the suffocating quiet. It is a pantomime of ordinary, maternal care, twisted into an act of terrifying finality. She smooths the blankets. She adjusts the pillows. She whispers the gentle, soothing words of comfort that only a mother knows how to say. She administers the bitter medicine to the sleepy, trusting faces, and she kisses them goodnight for the very last time. She is building a sanctuary of silence. With every child that slips into the eternal sleep, the room grows quieter. The chorus of soft, rhythmic breathing begins to fade, piece by piece, like a beautiful song slowly dying away on the wind. She reaches the final bed. It is the youngest. He is clutching a small, worn stuffed animal to his chest. As the mother sits beside him, he murmurs softly in his sleep, a sweet, incoherent babble. She reaches out and gently untangles his small fingers from the toy, resting his hand softly on the mattress. She performs the terrible ritual one last time. When it is finished, she remains sitting beside him. The room is now wrapped in an absolute, profound stillness. The soft, comforting sound of the children breathing is completely gone. The only sound left in the world is the low, mechanical drone of the ventilation fans, pushing stale air through the iron grates of a room that no longer needs to breathe. The mother looks around the dim, artificial twilight. She looks at the 6 small beds. She looks at the perfect, unbothered faces of her children. They look exactly as they did an hour ago, peaceful, beautiful, and completely untouched by the horrors of the war. To her deeply broken mind, they are finally safe. The bombs cannot hurt them now. The ruins cannot bury them. They are locked away in a pristine, terrible perfection. But the silence is agonizing. It is a heavy, physical thing that presses against her eardrums and crushes her chest. It is the loudest, most deafening silence a human being can endure. It is the sound of an empty nursery. It is the sound of a future that has been violently, quietly erased. She reaches out with a trembling hand and gently pulls the heavy woolen blanket up, tucking it carefully around her youngest son's shoulders. She smooths the edge of the fabric, ensuring there are no wrinkles. She performs this one last, tiny act of care, a desperate clinging to the role she has just abandoned. She slowly stands up. She does not weep. Her grief is too vast, too entirely consuming for something as simple as tears. She is a woman made of hollow, echoing stone. She walks toward the door, her footsteps soundless on the gray floorboards. She does not look back. To look back would be to see the terrible truth of her own actions, and she cannot allow that truth to reach her. She must keep her eyes fixed on the shadows ahead. She steps out into the long, pale corridor. She reaches out and takes hold of the heavy brass handle. She pulls the door shut. The hinges move silently, and the latch clicks into place with a soft, definitive sound. It is the closing of a tomb. Out in the hallway, the pale yellow electric bulbs cast their long, unchanging shadows. The bunker remains exactly as it was. The older aides still wait in their quiet corners. The young secretaries still stare blankly at their silent typewriters. The earth still trembles, occasionally dropping fine gray dust from the concrete ceiling. But the soul of the underground has vanished. The mother walks slowly down the corridor, fading into the dim light. She carries the terrible silence with her, leaving behind a room filled with wooden toys, perfectly aligned shoes, and a tragic, heartbreaking peace. The children rest in the deep, unbothered dark, wrapped in their eternal lullaby, forever sleeping through the storm, while the broken world above them continues to fall into the ash. To leave the only sanctuary you have ever known is to step willingly into the mouth of the dark, guided by nothing but the fragile beating of your own heart. The time for waiting has finally come to an end. The pale, windowless corridors of the subterranean world, bathed for so long in that unchanging, artificial yellow light, are suddenly emptying out. The deep, mechanical drone of the ventilation fans, the lullaby that has watched over their sleep and their waking hours, is left behind to hum to an empty room. A small, exhausted group of survivors stands at the threshold of the emergency exit. They are the secretaries, the orderlies, the gentle hands that typed the letters and poured the tea. They look back one last time at the concrete walls that held their fears, their tears, and their quietest whispers. And then, with a heavy, collective breath, they turn away. They do not climb up into the ruined gardens. The sky above is too broken, too filled with the violent storms of a collapsing world. Instead, they choose to go deeper. They slip through a heavy, rusted door and step out into the vast, sprawling network of the city's abandoned subway tunnels. As the heavy door closes behind them, sealing away the light of the bunker forever, the absolute reality of their journey takes hold. The transition is profoundly shocking to the senses. The air here is entirely different. It no longer smells of old paper and warm electric bulbs. It smells of wet earth, of ancient iron, and of the cold, stagnant water that pools between the tracks. It is a thick, heavy air, untouched by the wind. But the most overwhelming sensation is the darkness. It is not the soft, forgiving twilight of a summer evening, nor is it the dim, shadowy corners of the bunker. This is an absolute, impenetrable blackness. It is a darkness so complete that it feels like a physical weight pressing against their faces. When they hold their hands up before their eyes, there is nothing to see. The loss of visual reality is terrifying, yet, in a strange, surreal way, it is also a protective cloak. The dark does not judge them. It does not wear a uniform. It simply wraps around them, hiding them from the broken world above, offering a blind and silent passage through the underworld. They become a procession of ghosts, moving soundlessly through the void. Without their sight, their other senses become hyper-aware, reaching out into the blackness like invisible tendrils. They learn to navigate the world entirely by touch and by sound. Beneath their feet, the ground is treacherous and uneven. They step onto the railway tracks, their thin-soled leather shoes crunching softly against the sharp, loose gravel of the ballast stones. Imagine the profound difficulty of this simple act of walking. They cannot see where to place their feet. They must slide their toes forward, feeling for the heavy, wooden railway ties that span the tracks. The wood is damp, slick with subterranean moisture. Every step is an act of blind faith. A young woman, whose feet ache from the hard, unforgiving stones, reaches down and slowly unties her shoes. She slips them off, tying the laces together and draping them over her shoulder. She chooses to walk in her stockinged feet, finding it easier to feel the cold, smooth steel of the rails. The metal is freezing against her skin, but it is a continuous, unbroken line. It is a guide. It tells her which way is forward. In this absolute blackness, the human need for connection becomes the only thing keeping them alive. They form a human chain, a delicate, unbroken lifeline of warmth in the freezing dark. A weary orderly reaches out, his hand grasping the shoulder of the man in front of him. A nurse firmly holds the hand of the young secretary behind her. They grip each other with a desperate, fierce intensity. If the chain breaks, if a hand slips away, a person could be lost forever in the winding, branching labyrinth of the tunnels. This chain is a masterpiece of quiet, everyday heroism. It is the transfer of courage through the fingertips. When the young secretary feels her legs trembling, when the crushing weight of the dark threatens to overwhelm her breathing, the nurse gives her hand a firm, reassuring squeeze. 2 quick pulses of pressure. It is a silent language born in the shadows. It says, "I am right here. I will not let you go. Just take one more step." And the secretary squeezes back, drawing strength from the warmth of another human being, pulling herself forward through the void. They walk in profound silence. They are terrified that even a whisper might echo down the long, tiled corridors and betray their location. The silence is so deep that it rings in their ears. The only sounds are the rhythmic, shuffling crunch of footsteps on the gravel, the slow, synchronized breathing of the group, and the occasional, lonely sound of water dripping from the arched ceiling. splashing softly into invisible puddles below. Drip. Splash. Crunch. Breathe. It becomes a hypnotic, walking meditation. To survive the journey, their minds must detach from the terrifying reality of the tunnels. They cannot think about the tons of earth and ruined city pressing down on the curved brick ceilings above their heads. They cannot think about the distant, muffled thuds of artillery that occasionally send deep vibrations traveling down the steel rails. Instead, they turn inward. They walk through the pitch-black tunnels, but in their minds, they are walking through the brightest, safest memories of their lives. The older orderly, his hand resting on the rough fabric of a coat in front of him, closes his unseeing eyes. He builds a world of light behind his eyelids. He remembers the feeling of a warm, Sunday afternoon in a park long ago. He can almost smell the sweet fragrance of roasted almonds. He can hear the distant, joyful music of a carousel, the wooden horses rising and falling in the sun. He holds onto the memory of his wife's laughter, letting it play over and over in his mind like a protective spell. He focuses all of his attention on that beautiful, simple sound, using it to push back the encroaching panic of the dark. For hours, they trudge onward. Time completely dissolves. There is no day or night in the underworld, no clocks to measure the agonizing crawl of the minutes. There is only the endless forward motion, the feeling of the wooden ties, and the desperate grip of the hand holding theirs. Fatigue settles deeply into their bones. Their muscles burn, their lungs ache from the heavy, damp air. Occasionally, the chain comes to a gentle halt. The leader of the group has found a small alcove, a widening in the tunnel where they can rest for just a few moments. They lean against the curved walls. The tiles are wet and covered in a thin layer of cold grime, but to their exhausted bodies, the wall feels like a luxury. They slide down until they are sitting on the edge of the concrete platform. In the absolute dark, small, beautiful acts of kindness unfold. Someone opens a small canvas bag and fumbles in the blackness until they find a canteen. It is passed carefully from hand to hand. You cannot see the person next to you, you can only hear the soft rustle of their clothing and feel their hands reaching out. Here, a soft, barely audible voice whispers, "Drink." A young woman takes the canteen. She brings it to her lips and takes a tiny, measured sip. The water is stale, tasting faintly of metal, but it is the most wonderful thing she has ever swallowed. It cools her parched throat. She wipes her mouth and gently guides the canteen into the searching hands of the man beside her. They share the meager rations with an absolute, selfless equality. In the dark, there is no hoarding, no selfishness. They are a single organism, surviving only through their profound care for one another. Someone softly clears their throat. The sound is startlingly loud in the quiet. "My ankle," a voice whispers in the dark, trembling with pain. "I don't think I can walk." There is a brief rustle of movement. An older man, a clerk who spent his days organizing files in the pale light of the bunker, shifts his position. He reaches out in the dark, finding the injured person's shoulder. "Lean on me," he whispers, his voice low and steady. "Put your arm around my neck. I will carry your weight." It is a promise made in total blindness, a vow to bear the suffering of another when you barely have the strength to carry yourself. When the group stands to resume their journey, the clerk wraps his arm firmly around his companion's waist. They move forward together, a clumsy, three-legged shadow limping through the dark. The clerk's breathing grows ragged with the extra effort, but he never complains. He simply tightens his grip, a quiet guardian angel in a world without light. As they journey deeper into the labyrinth, the tunnels begin to curve and branch. They navigate by touch, feeling the junction boxes on the walls, trailing their fingertips along the cold, wet cables that run like thick veins along the brickwork. The physical sensation of the wall becomes their map. Smooth tile gives way to rough, crumbling concrete. A sudden rush of cold air indicates a ventilation shaft above. They read the underworld with their hands, decoding the unseen landscape through the sensitive pads of their frozen fingers. Sometimes, the muffled vibrations from the world above grow stronger. The steel tracks beneath their feet hum with a terrifying, resonant energy, and a shower of flying dust drifts down from the unseen ceiling, dusting their hair and their shoulders. In these moments, the group freezes. They crouch low to the ground, pulling their coats tightly around themselves, holding their breath. They listen to the heavy, rolling thunder of the city breaking apart just meters above their heads. The fear is a physical ache in their chests. But even in the terror, there is a strangely peaceful resignation. They are buried in the earth, hidden away like seeds in the winter soil. They cannot fight the destruction, they can only wait for it to pass. They press their foreheads against the cold brick walls, finding a grounding comfort in the solid, immovable strength of the tunnel. The earth is trembling, but the walls hold. When the vibration fades, they rise slowly, dusting off their clothes in the dark, and they begin to walk again. They are moving away from the epicenter of the collapse, inching their way outward, following the buried arteries of the city. They do not know what awaits them at the end of the line. They do not know if they will emerge into a world that is still standing, or if they will walk out into a landscape of total ruin. But the uncertainty does not stop them. The simple, biological imperative to live, to seek the air and the sun, pushes them forward step by agonizing step. They are ghosts haunting the tunnels, carrying the tragic weight of history on their stooped shoulders. But as they walk, the heavy burden of the bunker begins to slowly slip away. The dark illusions, the maps, the bitter testaments, they mean nothing down here. In the absolute blackness, all that matters is the beating of the heart, the breath in the lungs, and the gentle, reassuring pressure of the hand holding yours. They continue their breathless journey, trusting the cold steel rails to lead them through the night. They walk in silence, a quiet congregation of survivors, navigating the vast and terrifying unknown with nothing but their fragile human resilience, hoping that somewhere, far ahead in the endless dark, the tunnel will finally open, and they will feel the sweet, impossible warmth of the morning sun. There is a moment, just before the eyes adjust to the light, when the air itself tells you that the long night has finally ended. For hours that stretched into an eternity, the small, exhausted group of survivors has navigated the pitch-black arteries of the underground. They have moved as a single, fragile organism, bound together by the desperate gripping of hands and the shared, synchronized rhythm of their breathing. They have walked through a void so absolute that the world above seemed like nothing more than a fading, beautiful dream. They have known only the cold, wet brick beneath their fingertips and the rough, sharp gravel of the railway tracks beneath their tired feet. But now, a subtle, profound change begins to whisper through the darkness. It does not happen all at once. It begins as a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere. The heavy, stagnant air of the deep tunnels, which has smelled of ancient iron and damp earth for so many miles, suddenly carries a new and startling scent. It is the smell of wood ash. It is the scent of crushed stone, of wet plaster, and, woven faintly beneath it all, the clean, undeniable fragrance of a recent spring rain. A young secretary, walking blindly in the center of the human chain, lifts her chin in the dark. She takes a slow, testing breath. The air is cooler here. It lacks the suffocating, mechanical heaviness of the bunker's ventilation fans. This air is moving. It is a genuine, living draft, slipping down from the surface and brushing gently against her face. It is a promise, carried on an invisible current, that the earth has not completely closed over them. Ahead of her, the leader of their quiet procession comes to a sudden halt. The chain of hands gently tightens, bringing everyone to a standstill. In the distance, at the very end of the curving tunnel, there is a soft, pale smudge against the blackness. It is not the harsh, unyielding yellow glare of an electric bulb. It is a delicate, diffuse gray, a fragile glow that seems to hover in the air like a ghost. It is the morning. A collective, trembling sigh ripples through the group. It is a sound of overwhelming, exhausted relief. They do not cheer. They do not run. They are far too tired, their bodies drained of all sudden energy. Instead, they begin to walk toward the light with a slow, reverent pace, like pilgrims approaching the end of a long and terrible journey. As they draw closer, the gray smudge resolves into the shape of a shattered stairwell. The concrete steps are blanketed in a thick layer of pale, chalky dust, and scattered with the debris of the city above. The light spilling down the stairs is muted by the overcast sky, but to eyes that have lived in absolute shadow, it is unimaginably bright. They reach the bottom of the stairs. Slowly, gently, the human chain begins to dissolve. The tight, desperate grips are loosened. Fingers uncurl. A nurse softly squeezes the hand of the young woman beside her one last time before letting go. They do not need to hold on to one another to survive the dark anymore. The light has returned to guide them. They begin the final ascent. With every step upward, the gray light grows stronger, painting their pale, tired faces with the colors of the dawn. The dust motes dance slowly in the quiet air, illuminated by the morning. They climb over fallen bricks and twisted pieces of metal, moving with an agonizing care, helping one another navigate the final obstacles. An older clerk reaches down, offering his hand to a weary orderly, pulling him up over a jagged step. There are no words exchanged, only the quiet, beautiful solidarity of people who have walked through the underworld together. Finally, they step over the threshold, emerging from the throat of the tunnel and out onto the surface of the earth. The profound sensation of that first moment is something that will live in their bones for the rest of their lives. It is the wind. After 105 days in a sealed concrete box, where the air was perfectly still and eternally stagnant, the sudden touch of the wind is a physical shock. It sweeps across the ruined streets, a cool, gentle morning breeze that rustles the heavy wool of their coats and lifts the tangled hair from their foreheads. It is a living, breathing thing. It touches their cheeks with a startling, immense tenderness, wiping away the phantom feeling of the bunker's damp walls. A young woman closes her eyes and simply stands perfectly still, turning her face into the breeze. She opens her mouth slightly, drinking the air in. She feels the coolness travel down her throat and fill her lungs. It is an honest, untethered breath. It is the vast, open sky rushing in to replace the claustrophobia of the deep. A single tear slips from the corner of her eye, tracing a clean path. Through the fine layer of gray dust on her skin, carried away by the gentle passing of the wind. When they open their eyes and look upon the world, they are met with a haunting, breathtaking reality. The city they once knew, the grand boulevards, the towering monuments, the bustling squares, has been completely transformed. It is a landscape of quiet, slumbering silhouettes. Buildings have been reduced to jagged, hollowed-out shells, their broken walls reaching up toward the gray sky like the ribs of ancient, forgotten ships. The streets are blanketed in a deep, pale ash, softening the sharp edges of the rubble and turning the entire world into a muted, monochromatic painting. But in this devastation, there is no longer any noise. The deafening, terrifying roar of the artillery has finally ceased. The deep, rumbling thuds that shook the dust from the bunker ceiling are gone. The violence has passed, leaving behind a vast, echoing stillness. It is the heavy, peaceful quiet of an aftermath. The world is broken, but it is finally at rest. The survivors stand together in the smoldering street, taking in the profound silence. They look at one another in the natural light for the first time in seasons. Without the artificial yellow glare of the underground, they see the true toll the bunker has taken. They see the deep, hollow shadows beneath their friends' eyes. They see the gray in the hair of the older aides, the sharp angles of collarbones beneath loose clothing. They are a collection of ghosts, pale and frail, covered in the fine, white dust of the ruins. Yet, in the soft gray light of the dawn, they also look profoundly beautiful. They possess the quiet, dignified beauty of endurance. They are alive. They are breathing the open air. Small, incredibly tender moments of humanity begin to blossom in the quiet street. An older officer, his uniform devoid of all its former rigid authority, reaches into his pocket. He pulls out a clean, neatly folded white handkerchief. He steps toward a young secretary, whose hands are dark with the soot of the tunnels. With a gentle, fatherly grace, he offers the cloth to her. She takes it with a soft, trembling smile, wiping the dirt from her palms. It is a tiny gesture, a return to the polite, civil graces of the world they are trying to remember. Nearby, an orderly reaches into the inner pocket of his coat. He pulls out a small, slightly crumpled envelope. It is the letter he wrote in the dim light of the bunker, the letter he composed to his wife, filled with memories of the sun and the apple trees. He holds it in his hands, looking down at his own careful handwriting. The paper is safe. The words have survived the fire and the dark. He presses the envelope gently against his chest, right over his heart, closing his eyes as a wave of quiet, resilient hope washes over him. He will find a way to mail it. He will find a way home. As they stand there, surrounded by the haunting stillness of the shattered city, the thick layer of gray clouds hanging low on the horizon begins to thin. A faint, golden warmth begins to bleed through the overcast sky. It touches the jagged peaks of the ruined buildings, turning the pale ash into a shimmering, soft silver. The light grows steadily, a slow, quiet victory of the morning over the long night. And then, the sun finally breaks through. It casts a long, brilliant ray of golden light down into the ruined street, bathing the small group of survivors in its gentle glow. The warmth is immediate and profound. It rests on their shoulders like a comforting blanket. It seeps into their cold, tired bones, chasing away the deep, subterranean chill that has haunted them for so many days. They turn their faces toward the light, lifting their chins, letting the morning sun wash over them. They close their eyes, feeling the vibrant, undeniable heat on their eyelids. In this quiet, golden moment, the horrific weight of the past 100 days begins to softly fracture and fall away. The bunker, with its dark corridors, its desperate whispers, and its heavy, steel doors, belongs to the earth now. It is buried, left behind in the silent dark. They are standing in a world forever changed. The structures they knew have fallen, and the lives they once lived are entirely gone. The road ahead of them is uncertain, winding through a landscape of immense sorrow and slow, painful rebuilding. But as the gentle spring wind rustles their clothes, and the golden sun warms their faces, they find a quiet, unshakable peace in the simplest truth of all. They take a deep, slow breath of the morning air. They open their eyes, looking out toward the bright, waking horizon. And with quiet courage, holding the fragile, beautiful gift of a new day, they take their first slow steps forward, leaving the shadows behind, and walking softly into the light.